Hello and welcome to episode number 81 of Killer POV. I'm one of your co-hosts, Rob G. from Icons of Fright and FearNet. Joining me as always is Elric Kane.
Why, hi, Rob.
Inside Horror.
The most polite
Jump
I've
Cut
ever been.
Cafe.
That was very polite.
I know.
Well,
we
because
have guests.
I can't even see you behind the mounds of beer that you actually bought for once.
I know. I was kind of impressed when he walked in with that because
impressed.
usually I have to like beg him to bring the beer.
I know, it's my doing.
Well, we
usually.
almost had somebody from the Commonwealth here. Not quite, because they broke away from the Commonwealth more, right? Ireland, Commonwealth? I don't know.
No, we're Irish.
Yeah, they're well out of the Commonwealth. I don't know. But some
I don't want to get too far into it, but I think Ireland might be Germany. At the minute.
All right, let me finish.
That was Rebekah McKendry. Welcome, Rebekah.
I've been working on my accent, guys.
Rebekah McKendry from Fangoria.
I got a
Welcome.
mouthful of candy corn right now, but I'm glad to be
It's
here.
okay, I have a mouthful of Guinness.
That's the way to do it.
And this is our special Halloween episode. We were so excited about these guests that we didn't even want to wait to bring them on. They're going to be here from the get-go. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Glenn McQuaid.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. And from New York, and Larry Fessenden.
Hey guys,
Yes.
that's delicious.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Drinking the cheap stuff.
It's always so
That's right, I
sexy.
brought
I
that.
feel right at home.
Yeah.
So welcome, guys. I mean, we've Rebekah and I have known Glenn and Larry for a little while.
These
Elric
guys are
just-
back from my New York days, and yours too.
Yeah. So we've always wanted to have you guys on since we started the show, and we were trying to figure out a way to make it happen. And this week, just everything kind of lined up perfectly.
I think I've emailed Larry at least 5 times saying, like, when are you going to be in LA? When are you coming? When are you
Well, I
coming?
think we tried to do this before because I come out very rarely, but when I do, it's always a full schedule. So I'm so
Right.
glad we made it work.
Yeah.
And we
for
talked
sure.
about it a lot, even though you're not in the film physically. We did a lot of talking about The Battery last year. And from the get-go, we were hyping that film.
Right.
After AJ gave it to us, we started hyping. We had Jeremy on the show. Your name came up a lot.
You've seen it
being
now,
on
right?
the CB radio.
Yes, not only have I seen it, but without giving too much away, I'm talking to Jeremy about the next piece,
course.
which is so exciting. He's
Yeah.
just a wonderful guy, and I love his sensibility, and read the new script, so we'll see what happens. But
Yeah.
Cool.
Is
Yeah.
it too much information? Is it a sequel or is it a?
Oh, by no means. A totally different vibe. But of course, it's all about his personality. I mean, I think it has so much in common with other Glass Eye movies where he puts the heart first and the horror, that's a very close second.
Right.
This
Right.
is a lovely blend, you know.
And that's what The Battery is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you
Yeah.
really love those guys, and then the horror is much more acute. So it's always been my agenda, and it's so fun to hook up with new talent that's
Yeah.
pursuing that same idea.
And just from this last year, we spent a lot of time. Elric has
Elric's already
already
making a mess.
spilled beer on the table
on, man.
again.
Right.
We
Record
christened
time.
It usually
the
takes.
show.
It usually happens about a half an hour in.
I'm in good company.
It's going to be a good show. Well, I was just going to give accolades to Jugface, so which we talked a lot about last year. It was in my top 10 from the year.
Actually, if you look back at our top 10, we might be one of the few shows that all three of us, I believe,
Had Jugfish.
had Beneath in our top 10. Or like me and you had in our
man.
top 5.
That meant so much to me because that movie got maligned rather
Yeah.
quickly by a bunch of little. Can we swear on the show? By some
Say whatever
pricks.
you want.
Do you feel
who
like
I
that could have
still
been because it
resent.
was for TV, like because it was going on Chiller or something, that people had a different idea about
I was
what it was
wondering
going
that
to be?
too. Like, because it's a fish, giant fish on television, did they immediately say, "Oh, it's a sci-fi picture," or that equivalent, and not be expecting something different?
I think it was a perfect storm of a lot of stuff. I think the knee-jerk reaction to a show that's on Chiller is that it's going to be silly. And then, let's face it, it is a giant rubber fish, and it's a pretty much cliche-laden script. But I like to believe that I treated it a little differently and that it has a more satirical bite to it and some elegant filmmaking. But I think if you go in with one attitude, you're bound to find the snarky stuff. And so it just got off to a bad start.
I think it was a
thanks to
bad
you
start.
guys, you know.
Yeah, a bad start in that the initial response. I think people were expecting one thing and they got another. But I think when it came out then on Blu-ray or whatever, people really, the reviews I read of it then really got what you were going for. I think it's on one level it's a B movie. You know, you've got your giant rubber fish and so on. You got these characters, but there was a whole other layer in there that I think a lot of people just missed in the initial round.
So, I mean, it is what it is. I don't want to oversell it, but I think there's almost an element of people not being able to read movies anymore. You know, they sort of see the superficial absurdity of the situation. Why can't these kids get to shore? And it never occurs to them to read a movie more like a fable or the allegory in play. So,
but that strikes me as have to be
hard for all
somebody
of us.
who hasn't seen your movies, because that's what your movies are. You said it wasn't what they expected. That's exactly, your movies are exactly what you're not expecting. You're not making it as escapism, right? You're making a movie for people to think about what stories are.
Hopefully,
and that's what that film. I mean, I remember we talked about that.
We watched it together.
We talked about how it was a fish, but it wasn't about the fish. And I remember that we said it was the same thing with a lot of Larry's movies, that it's about Wendigo, but it's not about the Wendigo, and it's about the last winter, but it's not about the big giant creatures or anything like that.
You mean the Wendigo?
He can fly at you like a sudden storm without warning from nowhere.
You know that's his voice, right?
Oh, really?
Oh, dude, it's such a funny story.
That's
Very
funny.
quickly, the actor basically froze on set. He could not remember his lines. He was a non-actor. He was
he
a Native
the Indian man?
American
Yeah, the
dude.
Indian man, yeah.
So we figured, we tried all these things. I literally had huge cards, and that didn't work. And then I gave him an earpiece, and I was like saying the lines, and it's out. And there'd be these huge pauses while he listened to what I said, and he'd be like, "The fly at you, sudden, the storm." But all the while, I had loved his voice so much that I had started to learn to imitate it. So eventually the DP said, well, I know what we'll do. We'll pan off him every time he starts talking. If you watch the scene, it's like the Wendigo is about to talk, and then you pan off him. And then I just ended up dubbing the whole thing. That's very embarrassing.
Your hair was similar, too. Like, he had longer hair at the back. So
Well, I style most people
yeah.
after mine. I try to get all the actors to look like myself.
And for those who can't see the show, Glenn looks exactly like Larry.
It's happening.
Exactly. Everyone who works for him.
I was clean cut a while ago.
But I will say, I know we jumped way off and we're going around, but with Beneath, the one thing I'll say, I remember watching. We watched it together.
We watched it together.
After the one death, without a spoiler to anyone, there's a character's death. That is really one of the best orchestrated, most Hitchcockian moments I've seen since Hitchcock. And that wasn't even an exaggeration. I was like, take this out of the movie even. And it's just so beautifully executed and surprising because you don't really narratively expect that character at that point.
Dynamite. Yeah. And I love referring to it as Hitchcock. I mean, actually, who else does that is Spielberg, which is where a little mistake leads to someone's undoing. Another great event is in Night of the Living Dead when the girl's in the truck and they spray the gas by mistake. The lighter goes up, the truck's about to blow, and she gets her sweater caught. Right. And I just love those kind of deaths because they're so like, oh, God, it's like stubbing your toe, but it leads to your demise.
Yeah, we talk about that on show, like when you see somebody's the cuticle or something get bent back. That's more painful than seeing a head lopped off.
Yeah.
And I think it's that recognizable quality.
Yeah,
exactly.
Fingernails or teeth.
And it's funny when I sat down with the writers of Beneath, and it was one of the few things I said, listen, guys, there's a number of things I'd like to consider changing, and if you're cool with it, then let's go forward. Not to put them on the spot, but but one of them was like, I have in mind this other death, and so that was really one of the things I wanted to do for that movie. Because to have everybody eaten by a fish, meh.
Yeah.
But the fish looked glorious. There was Gary Tunnicliffe did it.
Yeah.
They know I have a thing for aquatic horror.
Fractured Effects.
Oh, yeah?
Did the fish. And,
Very impressed by that fish. There's that great wide shot of it turning around, which is just fabulous. To get something like that in this day and age that's not CGI, and you can tell it's physical. Yeah. And it was there. It's beautiful.
I mean, just working with water and a CGI, there's no way our budget could handle it. I mean, that's obviously been done successfully recently, but it's pretty tough. So just to have the real thing, not to mention, come on, it's more fun. Funner for the kids. The actors get to stick their, axes in the real fish, and it makes for a much more immediate experience, I think, for everyone in the audience as well. And, you can laugh at the fish. That's part of the fun of it, of course. The fish is basically an innocent in the film. And that's my angle on it. I always say that the difference between this and Jaws is that in Jaws, you really like the characters. In my movie, you don't. So it's just this weird...
they're unpleasant people dealing with their issues.
Yeah, and it comes out of my disgust for Washington and the way we're basically just incapable of getting along now. And so, not to put too lofty a point, that is how I'm feeling. I always say my films are very personal, and that's it's my frustration with the state of affairs. That's what's in that movie, And I think maybe people watch it and they feel uncomfortable.
When you guys had, sorry, we're jumping into an interview on Beneath long before we even started the movie.
The last thing
want to talk
people
about your
want
last
to,
film.
you guys are going to start losing fans really quickly.
Come on, it's a giant fish.
Well, I'm curious because I love the fish. So when you guys approached Fractured Effects to make it, how did you tell them you wanted it to look? I mean, because it looks like a combo of a couple of different freshwater fishes.
Yeah, that's all it was. I just went in the old Photoshop and started pushing some images around. And I didn't want to, maybe I, in the second thought, might have taken a different approach, but my approach was to make it look like a normal fish, kind of what you maybe would encounter. And then I like the idea of these quills on the back, because obviously I wasn't going to have a dorsal fin. It's a freshwater fish, not a shark. But I wanted to have that iconic image going through the water, and I found porcupine quills and put them on top of a fish, and I found some deep water fish that have cooler mouths and weird faces. But in the end, I didn't want to create a recognizable monster. I wanted it to be like, well, maybe you really would have seen this in the water in a lake and not quite known. The other thing, we don't have an origin story. There isn't like the nuclear plant in the background. Yeah. It's just, what the fuck, And
were you ever tempted to introduce an origin story? Because actually, isn't there a comic book prequel, right?
Even the prequel, the fishes exist, and it just takes us back to when the Indians were fighting the same species of fish, so it's kind of cool. Well, look, I take a page out of Jason Zinnemann's book. I don't know if you guys interviewed him, but he's
New York, so we haven't had him out here.
I mean, it's very spectacular.
It's a good book.
We really feel an intimate relationship to all our favorite recent directors of horror, like Carpenter and then Romero and all these guys. You kind of get their story, but one of Jason's premises is that since Psycho, the failing of Psycho is that you have the lengthy explanation at the end of the movie, and he says movies after that departed from explaining the monster. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of true, Night of the Living Dead, you never know. They sort of speculate, did they, it was a comet or, all kinds of weird things, but you never know, and that's part of the excitement of it. And it's funny that in our modern world, the remakes of Halloween do try to sort of psychoanalyze Michael, and so you get back to that. But Jason's premise is that in the 60s, there was no explanation, and that made these things unsettling. Last House on the Left, all this stuff just seemed arbitrary.
But it also echoed, like in the documentary our friend Joe made, it also echoed things like Vietnam, where you couldn't explain that either. What was the origin story? No one remembered how we got into a war.
Exactly.
How do we get out of a war? It's unknowable.
And that's when horror had more of a bleakness, which I think made it a more alternative genre for that brief window.
Much more brutal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I remember when I was a kid growing up and watching the trailers for great horror flicks would come on the TV, like The Shining or Amityville Horror. Even, let me see, the 1979 Dracula. And you're watching a TV show, and then all of a sudden there's this 1 minute glimpse into this horror movie that there's no explanation to it. It's just brutal and horrific. I love that feeling of intrigue. And I love leaving the cinema still intrigued, asking my own questions about what the fuck, It always kills me then when sequels or remakes go back and try and explain every little
Origin
thing.
Stories are the worst.
I think a lot of the magic is lost. Yeah. It's interesting that Jason said that.
That's really a premise of his book. He repeats it often in the telling of.
There's actually a lot of academic theories on that equate it to postmodernism and the movement of postmodernism in the late 60s. And that's where it came from, is suddenly because our art no longer had to have meaning or end, neither did our movies.
Beautiful.
Right.
And so,
but the least Gus Van Sant could have done is cut that part out. You're going to give me a shot-by-shot remake and you're going to still leave that in. Thanks a lot, buddy.
That is bizarre, right?
Well, at least improve.
But that's why, there's endlessly, we always celebrate the movies of the 70s. Mm-hmm. In fact, I wonder what generation will finally say, I don't want to talk about it anymore. But let's face it, the movies, that's also a trait. If you look at Taxi Driver or Deliverance, these movies leave you hanging, and you leave the theater and you're not resolved. Nowadays, you go to a film, at least the blockbusters, and everything's tied up in a bow, and so you literally forget about it because you've been satiated and you've climaxed, and then you go home, you clean up and go have dinner. When you're haunted by the ending, you're like, what the hell? Oh my God, what happened next? And Straw Dogs or even The Graduate. Suddenly I'm on a Dustin Hoffman riff, but you literally end these movies where people sort of staring like, what just happened to me?
And can I just mention the great Phantasm, which is a movie you can watch as many times as you want and still walk away confused.
I have never seen Phantasm. It's like my virginal thing.
Oh my God. Hold on to it for a little bit.
And now, I keep telling them, I'm like, every single time throughout my entire life that I've gone to watch Phantasm, somebody's like, oh no, wait, this has to be special. It's like,
kind of true.
Yeah. It's like
I want you to sit next to Angus in the in the darkened theater, just you and him, and he'll turn to you now and again. And say,
I watch a horror film every day since I started at Fango over a decade ago, and I've yet to see any of the Phantasm.
That's beautiful.
So
have you made up your own story? Or
I know what I think it's about, but it's not, and I can quote it. I mean, like the boy and all this stuff because I've seen so many clips, but. Yeah, it's like this. I
think that's great.
It's got to be special now, guys. It's going to be special with the right person.
Well, we're waiting for theatrical. Like we're waiting for it to play again on the big screen here for her to see it because I've always I grew up watching it on video, Phantasm, and then a few months ago we had a panel here with Angus and the whole crew, and what surprised me is we kept showing clips that they would do little commentary over live. And hearing an audience react to these scenes, it made me appreciate and look at the movie in a different way than what I remember seeing as a kid. So I was like, you know what, if Becca's going to see it, it has to be with an audience on the big screen.
I mean, I think what's the strongest thing for me about it is the tone. It's a very eerie, otherworldly movie. I mean, I feel like it's set in a different universe. It's a kid's movie. It's from...
And they're the most effective when you do the childhood traumas. Yeah. Wendigo obviously is also largely about childhood trauma. But those movies where it's from their perspective and they're seeing things that don't make sense to them, but you can kind of go along for the ride.
And I think there's a right way and a wrong way of doing that. I think Coscarelli nailed it. And he had done... he did a children's movie prior to that. I think it was...
Beastmaster?
No, it was, Joe, the World's Greatest, or something along those lines. But he really got into the... mind of the child and develop the universe around that, whereas I kind of appreciated Where the Wild Things Are recently, but it was filtered such through the director's eyes that it lost a lot of that magic.
Well, it's something I've been thinking about a lot because I have a young child, and the one thing we talk about child's entertainment now. No, thanks for reminding me. I mean, hopefully they're still around. Whatever.
Who knows what happened this afternoon? He couldn't find us.
I'm not here. Whatever.
It's a crapshoot now.
But watching their TV shows or the movies now, and seeing the trailers we talked about a few weeks ago, they're not made for kids. I saw the new trailer to Annie. These are made for adults. They're just not making films for the magic of being a child, the wonder of cinema. It's just escapism for the person who pays the ticket to go and enjoy them, and it's a bummer because that's how we all fell in love, and that's how you get infected.
It's not me who has watched Frozen like 30 times. That's not my doing. There is something there that she's liking.
Well, no, Frozen I think is a special case, but in general, they're just like, I want
to put a bullet in that DVD.
Really rose above the
exactly.
And also, I mean, Pixar is Pixar. That's the ultimate sort of American successful sort of cinema. There's definitely great ideas, weird rhythms, all sorts of good stuff. But Miyazaki, if you want to talk about a true kind of a magical realism, a transporting even more wonderment, that's really the guy to go for. So if you have kids...
He just retired, right?
He retired, but his canon is amazing. And actually, I think the Studio Ghibli continues on with lovely things, but...
Talk about strange rhythms or weird rhythms. I showed my niece, Abby, Spirited Away.
Yeah, I'm like, God, what the hell?
She sat with it and watched it with her parents, and her parents called me and they were like, what the hell are you showing her? That's weird. That's a strange movie, Kind of square about it, but Abby loves it. She's like the biggest fan now. She's watched them all. She's watched
My Neighbor Totoro is amazing, but if you watch it, like at least 30% of the movie is literally just landscape shots. Beautiful, it's just the camera moving through the environment with no action.
Well, we
don't see that as much.
He's an environmental filmmaker. I mean, sometimes explicitly there's a cautionary element and this and that, but it's also just the majesty and the beauty and the way he photographs, sky and all this.
If you're just joining us, this is our special on Japanese. And we are going to go through the canon of all
Killer Giant Fish movie.
So Perfect Blue was made. And I just wanted your take. I know Aronofsky talked about... No. I did want to ask you guys quickly, talking about 70s filmmaking, do you remember the films you saw in the 70s filmmaking that made you feel like you could make movies? Not just like, I love cinema, but actually, you know what? I can actually do this. I can make a movie and I want to make something like that.
Well, I remember watching One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which was absolutely and still is one of my top favorite films. And there are two shots of Nicholson standing talking to the nurse. And in one shot, his hand is in one configuration on the glass. And then in the reverse, it's in another. And that's when I realized shot, reverse shot. Yeah. It just goes to show that that's how naive one was. I mean, I was 12 or 13, and I was trying to understand how this all worked. It's like, did they just put it on as a play and film it? I mean, all this level of naivete that it's preposterous now. Every kid knows how everything is done. In fact, they become, critics. But so that's when I sort of understood and was very passionate about this kind of filmmaking, and also movies like Phantasm. You could see how the effects were done, and you bought into it. Or, obviously the older movies that I grew up on, you could see the guy in the monster suit, and you were like, well, all you need is a cool suit. The rest will follow. So I come from that generation, and that's my tradition. I still use that, rubber fish and all the stuff Glenn and I do. There's an element of you can see through the effects, and I find that very charming and exciting.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Glenn?
Talk about being naive. I think I was that naive up until my late teens, and I just had no idea how movies were made. I didn't understand. Like that, I thought they were filmed plays, I guess, or I didn't understand why the director just wasn't the only credit there besides the actors. I didn't know how it worked. But getting back to Phantasm, I saw that movie poster in a local video store, and I'm sure it's the same poster over here. It's kind of pink. And it's very strange, a lot of illustrations of what's going on in the movie. So I wasn't allowed to rent out the movie, so I went home that night and I wrote an essay on what I thought the story was, and went into school the next day and told all my friends about Phantasm and what it was, and of course weeks later they all found out I was a complete liar. But there was an intrigue and a desire to sort of tell stories. And I think that's where it came from me, to tell stories. I had no idea how movies were made at all.
I also love what Glenn's saying is that, in those days, it was so much harder to get to the movie. This was even before video when I was watching, when I was growing up. So sometimes the poster was all you knew of a movie. You'd see it in Famous Monsters of Filmland or something like that, and you'd conjure up these your own version. There's a movie called A Reptile, which I've never seen, but there's this very famous. Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what could go on in that movie, but the picture of the woman with the snake face is like,
got
whoa.
A beautiful monster suit in it.
Stayed with me forever, and that was part of the magic of sort of not knowing and not being able to quickly Google something. You were like, what the?
And you really miss that now when you're looking for something to watch now, where you're looking, all you have is like Netflix streaming or some shit.
Yeah, it's weird.
You don't have that art. There's something so magic about the
whatever,
video store.
Whatever art you're looking at isn't in the movie. It's kind of the way that it goes now.
Yeah. Well, there was always that element, which is part of the charm.
Yeah.
It's like you're like, what is this poster? This monster's
You're
not
waiting
in.
for it. You're waiting for
explosions.
They basically were
helicopters.
creating this whole world for each of these movies. Some of them real crap, but like what is that movie with the giant aliens with the huge like paper mache heads and the big eyeballs? And,
Attack of the Saucer.
Yeah, Saucer People, exactly.
Or Invasion.
Ding,
it's something
ding,
with
I want a bell.
people.
That's
or what's
perfect.
the gorilla one with the astronaut head and the skull, which never exists in the actual movie?
What is that?
The one it's on the front of Landis's book, but it's
It had to be AIP pictures, I'm sure.
yeah,
Some guy came
But in the actual
to-
movie, it's just a monkey with a stupid mask, but they don't even have the skull, and the skull's the thing everyone knows
So
the
cool.
movie for.
Yeah.
Well,
I
you're
gotta look-
reminding me
oh,
of the
I'm looking that one
imagery, the great moment in Tales from the Crypt, which has so much great stuff. But when there's the skull man on the motorcycle behind, and the guy looks in the rearview mirror. Is that Tales from the Crypt?
Is that
I think it's the monkey's paw,
maybe?
the monkey's paw version, right?
Right.
I don't know.
Anyway, just so many. The imagery when you were a fanboy was so cool. Obviously, there's some element of that still, but there's the excitement over the new poster coming out or something. But
Well, also, I mean, for me growing up, I think the divide between my life and cinema was also a lot of the films I was watching were like Hammer, like Brides of Dracula or the horror Dracula, Curse of Frankenstein, and so on. So, and further than that, the RKO movies and Universal. So there was a great divide, not only from where these films were made for me, but when, and so they were just kind of like these magical elements I was kind of tapping into.
I've often wondered why Hammer was popular in England. Like I like watching. We watched one on Sunday, and Robot Monsters.
Robot
the
Monsters,
That's
the
right.
name of it. Gorilla suit with a deep sea diving
But
helmet.
because I really like
Robot
Hammer,
Monster.
but I don't necessarily understand in that time period how it could have been popular. It was because it's like 59 is the first one, I think, Horror of Dracula, right? And I was just watching it the other day. We were watching it, and I was just thinking, how did these become like box office for England kind of sensations? Was it just because they were a little more sexual?
I think sexual and shocking and
more gore.
Well, yeah, gore
the Technicolor
and the
blood
Technicolor blood. Prior to that, Hammer were doing kind of just
Chaste, kind of.
yeah, just kind of
Creeping
kinky,
moss film.
well, kinky little comedies and so on,
Right.
and they were quite stiff. And there's an argument that a lot of the early Hammer stuff is pretty stiff, but I think it was just shocking at the time. I think they got a lot of bad publicity that did great for them. The initial reviews are these films are disgusting. There was almost a video now, you could liken it to the early video nasty from the 80s. There's a reaction to it that got everyone curious. And they're kinky, they are still quite sexual.
No, they're great films. It was more just that, wow, these were like number one at the box office. Watching these Hammer films where people are in a period costume. Because horror's never, really, and especially in the last 30 years, done well as period so much in the last...
Well, I think also...
It did well during, if we're looking at the AIP stuff and the Corman Poe cycle, then we were able to do the flashback. And especially, if we're going back to the origins of film, they were doing more of the Victorian times, but now. But
recently, I think there's a distancing effect.
Well, recently, everything's shot to bed. I think Americans are incredibly literal in all their ways they're thinking. Even it's amazing that Babadook has a chance because that's puppetry as opposed to CGI.
Again, it's Australian.
Film. Well, exactly.
It didn't come from here. It came from elsewhere.
Not to confuse, that's something to look forward to. But I think the other thing historically that's interesting is that the Universal pictures with Frankenstein, Dracula, Wolfman, all those great movies that were period and, obviously at that point, even then, were looking like old-fashioned. They were now hitting TV, and you had a whole new generation of kids that were getting into the monster cycle, and then that's when Famous Monsters came out in the 60s as well, and then they started making the Aurora monster models, they were marketing all of this stuff to kids, and then the idea that there was a whole new cycle of these monsters, but now in sort of what at the time must have felt like contemporary treatment. So I think it's also just a historical thing of the kids were now pumped up. They were sort of up to speed. They knew what Frankenstein, Dracula, Wolfman was because they were seeing it on late night TV with Zachary introducing and that.
And suddenly here they are in color.
In color with tits. What could be better?
Interesting, yeah.
And there was a good sexual element to it, especially with the British. I think the British were kind of kinky. They really rose out of that stiff upper lip and. There's a lot of sexuality. There's a lot of bisexuality in some of the early Hammer stuff. Certainly with the vampirism. Not that Universal didn't do that. If you look at Dracula's Daughter, it's quite sexual. It's quite
also. We're not crediting. I really just think you have to say Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing were just riveting, and it was these guys seem like Shakespearean actors. There seems like some quality here.
Cushing can literally show up on screen and he just silently with his eyes look around, and I'm with him. I'm on his side, awesome. Every time.
And what about those cheeks? They're made for cinema. It's just like
we watched. Getting to what we watched this week, we did the 16 millimeter 12-hour marathon at Jump Cut on Sunday, and we watched House of Dracula. And Cushing showed up, and he's got on this fur ascot and this fucking
he's dressed
coat.
Gorgeously.
And I was just like, he's the man.
Christopher Lee wanted to fuck him so hard. He was just like, you are dressed so fly. I'm Dracula and you are the fly boy.
It's interesting. Brides of Dracula is Hammer's actual sequel to Dracula.
Is that the one with the redhead guy?
Yes.
I think that's
a
the
fabulous
best
movie.
Of all of those films.
It's gore. Actually, I really truly believe Mario Bava
copied it.
And what's his name? Silly old Argento.
The color of that
tapped
film.
into definitely inspired.
You hear that, Dario?
But it's really a sequel to. It should have been called Van Helsing because it's Peter Cushing that ties the two. It's a different vampire, and it's obviously I know why they named it and so on. But to watch it as a Van Helsing movie, it's absolutely fabulous.
That came on TV once, and it's nice to hear somebody else say that. And it came on, and I just remember thinking I didn't necessarily love the guy as the main vampire, but the way it looked and actually the film, I just thought it might have been the best of all those films. It was just gorgeous. It was like, I think you saw a print of that, didn't you?
I watched a print of it at somebody's house, and it was just gorgeous.
Technicolor, it's Technicolor, and
I just have a vague memory of Van Helsing kicking total ass in the last 15 minutes, and I'm like, this movie rules.
It's funny, it's just interesting to know what becomes popular in each period of time. Like even just thinking 10 years ago when people were talking about torture porn, even as like that was a main subgenre for a while. It's hard for me to believe that. But then again, we were in a war, and there's all these things that keep changing what we're into. And you keep talking about politics, and not to make the conversation political, but I am genuinely curious if you think this idea of the politics kind of like when I grew up in New Zealand, and there was news at 6 o'clock. One channel that played news, and it was news. Like, there's no debating it. This is what happened today. Now everyone goes, oh, okay, bummer. And now you have to choose where you go to decide what you want to hear. Do you want to hear this side? So do you think that's affected the way people also view cinema? Because I feel like the kind of movies being made do feel like, kind of in a similar way, feels like a bit of a sausage factory. We're just turning it out for everyone to kind of blank out. And I'm not talking about independent cinema, obviously. I'm talking about mainstream dominant cinema here.
Well, it's actually interesting. I mean, I do still think, and this is probably changing because I think the right wing knows that the one thing they've never had a handle on is popular cinema. Because, and I'll tell you why. It's because, at least the way they've drifted, how can you tell a story about the poor 1%er? In other words, the popular culture still wants stories of underdogs, people who work hard and do the right thing, and then they triumph. They're heroes, and so we have that archetype throughout. You can name any, and that's Frank Capra. The whatever it's called, the Christmas movie, Jimmy Stewart, all of these guys, all the way through to the 70s. These are all underdog characters, blue collar characters, struggling under the struggling against the man. So how can you make popular entertainment if you're a right wing and your idea is that the rich should get richer, the poor should do, it's funny. So what they do have is perhaps religious parables, and they'll try to get in that way. But anyway, my point is, I think cinema is always going to be a populist medium.
Right.
But more specifically, you're speaking of like this flow of entertainments, and I think we did have torture porn when America was torturing people, and there was a sort of a guilt and a shame and a curiosity about it. And also a backlash, that 24 thing of like, well, what would you do if he was a terrorist? You would torture him, So there's all this, I think that was on the mind. What I think is interesting now is with the Jason Blum trend, which is almost this found footage trend. And that's because all of us have our cell phones, and we could technically take pictures of monsters and ghosts. And that's the new trend. And I like it because it's sort of back to a softer ghost story thing. And then remember in the 90s, we had the whole Japanese,
the art dread,
which was a little bit because we'd run out of ideas. So I know it was just remake all the Japanese movies, but that was also a cool trend. In terms of how just one weird image can actually stay with you and spook you, even if it is just a girl with her hair combed in front of her face.
Well, it was cool that there were slow images. I think that was actually really exciting.
And that's what I love about paranormal. I'll defend those movies just because actually it reminds you to just sit there quietly. And you look at the frame closer and closer, and you're like, I'm getting weirded out.
Yeah. See,
and it also uses sound.
I always thought that was, we'd seen two successful films stateside in kind of that weird art dread. We'd seen The Others and Sixth Sense.
Ooh, I like that term. Ooh, art dread.
Art dread.
That's the name. Hashtag art dread.
Yeah, I like that.
So we'd seen two of them here, The Others and Sixth Sense, and they were really profitable and popular. And then everyone went, hey, you know who's doing that? The Japanese and the Koreans. Let's go. And then it was like, streamline, get over there and start grabbing films as quick as possible because that's what we were hungry for. Okay. Coming straight out of it. And then, of course, we went kind of polar opposite from that, where it was like these PG-13 horrors where nothing happens except for a cat jumping out, to torture porn. So we kind of just
It's a shame it always has to be something, though. I mean, I know. We seem to be caught in this cyclic vampire, zombie, ghost situation that's going around every couple of years. Although, I don't know, I feel like what's happening in some of the festival circuit, there are some original, unique movies that are standalone.
Oh, yeah, this year alone I've seen so many good, interesting films that I'll never, Under the Skin, Starry Eyes, movies that you can't really put a label on them.
But they won't necessarily create trends. I think that's what we're talking about two things.
Yeah,
I mean, thank God, like Don't Look Now, a great film from the 70s, that never technically started a trend.
No.
But it's a standalone, awesome film, and I keep talking about Babadook, which I've never seen, but presumably that will be one of those little treasures, just like Pan's Labyrinth or something. It's sort of related to horror, but what it doesn't fit in. And then there's this trending thing where you see one success, which breeds just a whole mountain of similar films, from Conjuring to Sinister, Sinister 2, Insidious 1, 2, and on. So it's fine. As I say, it's not the worst trend.
No.
Well, I mean, at least Insidious is still about imagination. I really respected that
and
franchise for
filmcraft,
that.
There's a lot of good old-fashioned jump scares.
But I mean, taking you even to a place called The Further is really a throwback to Phantasm. And we had a little campaign briefly. It was a flicker where I was like, Don Coscarelli for Phantasm, for Insidious 3. Seriously.
Oh, nice.
Let's get him in there.
And the biggest problem with Hollywood right now, and any director I meet over 50 has said the same thing, which is the ageist quality. When they're starting to
going to tend to that. God damn it.
Yeah, especially with sequels. Like, there are some people out there who I would kill. I would kill to see Coscarelli reinvent something like that rather than just keep on going and bleed something till it's kind of over.
I think Coscarelli has proved his worth. And
John Duggan is also full of
yeah.
imagination and vigor.
But
Bubba Hotep
I
is
actually
fabulous.
just did an interview on this morning. What I am seeing a trend, and you have to think more broadly to figure out what the cycle that we're seeing right now is, but what I'm calling it is the clustered cycle. And I just did an interview on this on NPR this morning.
Hashtag clustered cycle.
I prefer art trend.
Clustered cycle works. Yeah, I've also been calling them isolation horrors, but I think clustered is a little bit better and kind of more encompasses it, where you're looking at budgets, and budgets has become kind of the primary thing people are looking at when they're creating films now. So you are either clustered in a house or you're clustered with a specific group of people. It's no longer in the one that I used in the interview this morning. It's no longer the faculty. We can go from his house to the field to the school to the with 7 different people, and we're following them all over the place. Instead, it's 2 guys. Or it's Oculus. We are in this house. We cannot leave this house because if we leave this house, we have to pay for another permit.
But wait a minute, Habit had a Ferris wheel. What's up?
But I want to.
Yeah, but that was 94.
No, but I want to stand up for my company, Glass Eye Pix. We've never let budget get in the way, which is to say we make movies for almost nothing. But when Glenn says, I want to do a period piece with zombies, grave robbers, BBC production value.
And Ron Perlman.
I say, let's do it.
And you shoot it on Staten Island, which I still
don't know how you guys did. And we shot it in film.
Did.
Does anybody realize that? I mean, that's shot in 35 mil.
But that's what the story required. And I remember I actually made a short film called The Resurrection Apprentice starring Larry and Daniel Manchi. And that was similar to what you're talking about. And we shot it in an old cemetery, and a very small section of an old cemetery. And so for me, it was doing that. Yes, not only do we didn't have to worry about a lot of permits or so on, but as a director, you can really kind of, if you're in one place for a time, you can really kind of hone in on a specific tone, and your shots you can take a little bit more time. So as a director, having made a movie that spanned decades and kind of continents, we were all over the place in I Saw the Dead. I'm intrigued by the idea of honing in on like a house.
And I talked about how with these isolation or cluster horrors that what we are getting is amazing character studies, which I felt we were missing a lot of in the 80s and 90s horror films. When you have a cast of 12 people that you have to kill off immediately, you're not really getting character stuff. But what we are getting now is like The Battery. We're following 2 guys around, or Oculus, where we get to know these people really, really well. Or Starry Eyes, where the camera is literally following this one girl.
But Starry Eyes is no different than Habit. It's this exact same structure. It's that subjective. The camera is restricted to your character. We are going to see the film through the experiential events that happen to Larry's character in Habit, and anything else that falls by the wayside.
Also, just to speak to that, I'm not quite sure where I'm going with this, except promoting our own films. House of the Devil, of course, and then The Innkeepers. I mean, Ty almost pulled it even closer. He's like, because when we made House of the Devil, we stayed in the hotel where he made The Innkeepers.
That's right,
and Ty West typically was like, well, wait a minute, I know, we don't even have to leave the location where we're sleeping. We'll just shoot there. And, so in a way, he was really using that to his advantage, because that meant he could have extra dollies, maybe a steady cam with the same level budget. But what I'm also advocating is never to let... Do you remember Dogma? Lars von Trier came out with this thing, and everybody was all excited. And the New York Times was talking about it. Everybody was, and I always raged against it, because the thing about Dogma, on the one hand, it advocated for low-budget films, which I thought was awesome. But it also said, you can't have a prop that you bring in. You can't have time travel. It always has to take place in the moment. Yep. So it actually started to restrict and call attention to the creative element. Whereas my point is, like, let's make a sci-fi movie in space. Let's have a robot film. We made a movie called Automatons. We shot on Super 8
it's a cool movie.
For $30,000. People wore trash cans.
That's a crazy. I worked at Facets when that got released. I was working. So when you told last night, for anyone who didn't hear, Larry showed Habit, and I was the one at the end when you mentioned Charles Coleman. I worked with Charles Coleman for 2 years at Facets, and I never knew that story, so it kind of blew my mind to hear that's how Habit kind of was on the road. But I remember Automatons came out there, and I remember watching it like on their little screen.
Yeah, well, cool. James McKinney, he worked for me for years, and I always call him the outsider artist of Glass Eye Pix. I mean, sort of inspired by regional cinema. He also made a movie called Satan Hates You, which is literally like a Christian scare film.
It's
in
fun.
those days.
It's got Debbie in it. And Larry.
And Jim set out to make a Christian scare movie. He didn't set out to comment on them or be ironic about it. He just set out to make one. Cool. Yeah.
You play the devil, right?
No, not the devil. I'm a devil. You know, I'm one of the henchmen. But that's exactly, Glenn's right. Another thing we try to do is not just make snarky commentary movies. You know, you really have to believe in what you're doing, and that was cool. Jim it's a trippy film. People don't know what they're watching because they expect the sarcasm. They expect to be coming from a New York hipster telling everybody their business. Well, actually,
Jim removed himself.
Much more,
he removed himself. Like, there's no filter from a guy living in Brooklyn being ironic at all. It was just like, this is,
I will say in defense of Dogma, because the Nordic folk aren't here, they all broke the rules, and they made jokes about the breaking the rules, and they would always say, of course we're going to break them, and then when you break one, you have to come and you have to get on both your knees and you have to apologize to the group.
No, listen,
that was kind of cute.
I absolutely agree. It was basically a publicity stunt, and power to them, and it got people talking about low budget movies
and it made one
shaky
masterpiece.
Camera.
Out of 50 movies, it made one film, The Celebration, which is a fucking masterpiece. And it's scary. It's almost a ghost story in its its way. And so
yeah, here's to Dogma, but also fuck them.
Yeah, fuck them.
Or at the very least, I would like to amend Dogma and say, let the imagination run wild.
Sure,
whatever you want to do, we'll keep it on a budget, but we'll do it through creativity. We'll make paper mache fucking
that's Glass Eye
spaceships.
Pix,
Yeah, that's my point. Well, you can tell I was just pissed that I didn't get the New York Times article. They're talking about these freaking Nordic dudes.
You're talking about Ty, and I'm really curious about this genuinely, because I've never read an interview with you about this. How do you when you're looking for these people to work with in these periods when you were producing rather than directing, like, what did you see? Because that was very early for Ty. I know you had made that one short where he's running from like the abominable
how did you get
Yeti
from
or whatever.
that to the roost?
But like, just what are you seeing? What are you looking for in people? Is it just that ability to be thinking outside the box visually? And
a little bit. I mean, he came to be my intern, and I remember specifically Ty's the one who told me that Peter Jackson was going to make Lord of the Rings. In other words, I don't know whether we had cell phones then or what, but he got the news and he came to me and he was so excited. So he was basically he was in a class by Kelly Reichert, who was a filmmaker I've worked with, and she apparently would talk about habit.
One of your best performances, by the way, for people who don't know. Road movie by Kelly Reichert. What's the name of that movie?
River of Grass.
River of Grass, her first film.
And she was teaching a class, and she says, "Has anybody heard of this movie Habit?" And Ty raised his hand, only person. And she eventually realized that we might be like-minded and hooked him up as a intern for Glass Eye, and he came. And my joke is that within 2 weeks, I was working for Ty West. He would have me putting titles on his things with my Avid or whatever, and so on. Funny. So it was fun. I really liked. He made more than one short. He made 3 actually. Okay. And they all have like Graham Resnick in them and so on. Okay. So I said, kid, when you graduate, come back and I'll make a feature. Which was just like me smoking my cigar, whatever. But he showed up a week after graduation, and he had, this is the other thing about Ty, very smart, he had like 5 pitches. And one of them was a voodoo movie, and I remember telling him, I'm not into voodoo, dude. I want something else. And he knew that I was an environmentalist, and he said, well, this is about bats, and they come here because of the hardships in the environment in South America.
So I was like, bats? Wait, bats?
He played you. Really playing me like a fiddle. Awesome. But since we're here, let's tie it all in. So what happened is that James McKinney had already made a very low-budget movie, and one of Glenn's friends was in it. And so Glenn came to the cast party
for what was the movie? Jim's The Off-Season, and Brenda Cooney starred in it, and
was eventually going to be in I Sell the Dead,
and Innkeepers, and House of the Devil.
Oh yeah, so she became part of our troupe, but that was a friend of Glenn's, and so he came to the party and sort of he bought me a couple of beers. So we said, well, let's stay in touch, and he was working at an ad house that did stuff for the football games, but they did CG stuff, and that was what Glenn was running. So when Ty pitched this bat movie, I said, well, I'm going to get proof of concept. So I went out into Tompkins Square Park, and I ran around like I was being attacked. And then we had our comic book artist, Bram Ravel, who still works with us, draw little bat silhouettes on top of me. And it's an incredibly beautiful little piece of art, and I made Ty put it in the
You
making
considered just going with Bram's animations
Well,
for
I'm
the
such a
Roost, right?
sucker. I'm like, I always say, like, if I did Jurassic Park, I would have stayed with the claymation dinosaurs.
Yeah.
I was just so enamored with them. And similarly, I said, these bats look perfect. It's perfect. Bats would look like they were just drawn on the picture. So, but of course, Ty said, nah, can we do any better? So I went to Glenn and I said, can you get a whole team of guys working for nothing? Make some real bats. And they went in and they made wireframe and all the real work. And the bats are amazing.
I got to say,
Roost.
the bats are fantastic.
It's freaking amazing.
Who had the connection to Tom Noonan to play
That was me. He lives on my block.
Oh, wow.
So I'll be honest, I guess we can all, this is all in the past, but so the movie was pretty short. Ty West delivers like a 58-page script, which is quite long for him, actually. So we filmed it, and gee whiz, that old rule. It was like a 58-minute movie, and we're like, gee whiz,
It worked.
we can have a long credit sequence.
Funny.
But then we thought, well, what the hell else can we do? And we'd already, for Jim's movie, the one I mentioned, the off-season, I said, well, who do you want? Who would be good in it? And he said, well, I wrote it for Angus Scrimm when I wrote it in Hollywood. I thought it'd be an L.A. story. And I said, well, let's call him. Why not? So it started this tradition of trying to get, quote, names into these teeny little movies. These are $30,000 movies. So similarly, when Ty came up short, I said, well, maybe we can get a horror host to sort of, put it all in context. And I said I might be able to get Tom Noonan. The irony is that Tom didn't come cheap, and half the budget is Tom. And he said he literally bought his country house with his, put a down payment. Let's put it that way.
Wow, interesting.
It's a really beloved part of the thing. And I got to tell you, Tom Noonan has been in The Innkeepers. Of course, he's great in that. And he's also in Late Phases, which is coming out in November.
Wait, is he an innkeeper?
No,
House of
House of
Devil?
Devil.
House of the Devil.
What did I say? Yeah, House of the Devil.
As he pours his Guinness.
As he pours my Guinness.
If the movies are made that cheaply, if that's like not all,
Yeah,
obviously not all of
all.
them, the initial ones, but because horror, all movies are hard to recoup money, obviously, but when you're at that level, it almost doesn't matter, right? I mean, at $30,000, you could probably break even.
Well,
right?
let me be very clear because things have changed. Back in the day, so this weird little movie, I got to say, that's not one we often celebrate, but it was brought Angus into our fold. The off season, it has a couple of great scenes. Anyway, we made that for $35 and sold it for twice as much. That's how the market was in the 90s.
Sure.
People
Different time,
wanted
yeah.
content. They wanted to
Right.
put boxes on the shelves. It was a really great, fertile time. The Roost, which did not cost $30,000, it cost more like $120. Doubled, almost tripled the money, you see. So that allowed me to go crazy and say, oh, we'll make a Super 8 robot picture in the future. And so we made automatons. We made a lot of these. And then the irony is then we made Glenn's movie, and we've been in the hole ever since.
Which is, I'm actually not here by my free will.
Larry. Glenn, could you pour another Guinness for
I'll
me?
not only pour, I'll drink it for you.
So in terms of that, Glass, I guess I'm curious about how Glass Eye Pix works as a company. Is it like a mini studio in that, or do you have the same investors you go out to each time, and or is it?
Or are you doing like a slate even?
Yeah, like is that
Well,
how
we
it works?
did. Honestly, what happened is that so we made Ty's movie, and then a couple of other producer friends, people that I did know, they immediately saw the talent, and they said, "Let's hire Ty to write a script." So for tuppence, I mean, $300, something like that. We hired him, and he wrote House of the Devil. And I really distinctly remember, once again, Ty gave us like 6 different pitches, and unfortunately, that's the one the guys wanted to make, my partners, and I said, all right, fine. But I remember the other ones, and there were some great ones. And one of them sort of almost became the Innkeepers, like a couple of guys, Ghostbusters. I just remember them ordering pizza. This whole idea that
That's in there.
Ty and I share, which is, and Glenn's talked about it too, just sort of bringing it all down to the macro. The micro.
Yeah,
like not these high concept things, or at least start with a high concept, but just say, what would it be like? Well, you'd order pizza at some point, even as you're ghost hunting. So Ty had a couple of pitches, and they chose House of the Devil. We wrote the script, and then took a long time to find the money. He got very impatient, came to me, said, I just want to make a movie. So we made Triggerman, which was cool.
And that was before. I didn't know that was before it. I always thought that was right after.
Well, I don't know. Maybe it's how it came out, but we made that while he impatiently waited for the so-called money. Well, then we got, I think, some substantial money to make House of the Devil. That was a big step up. And And that started this relationship with MPI, which, you guys know because they put out a lot of great videos for us, including they made Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer years ago.
Yeah.
But they're a great video house, and they've also done the Hatchet franchise, take it or leave it. But anyway, they were buying movies and putting them on video, and they realized they wanted to get into actually producing them. So Ty was it might have been the second movie they did. And they really liked the experience, and they thought Glass Eye might have a secret. So we did a slate, and I immediately went to all my guys. I went to McKinney. I said, write me some scripts, and he wrote a story about a killer scarecrow, which was great. And I said, let's film in a cornfield. I know just the director for this. His name is Jim Mickle. He's a lovely guy. So I went to Jim Mickle, and Mickle said, scary scarecrow, I happen to have something else, a web series I've been working on with Nick D'Amici called Stakeland.
Oh, yeah.
And I read the first 2 little episodes, and I said, whoa. This is the tentpole. This is so good. We're going to develop this into a feature. So that was the slate. And then we made a lovely little film called
Bitter
Feast, which I love.
Bitter Feast is great.
Chef.
Yeah,
It's kind of our version of torture porn.
Yeah.
And then Hypothermia, which was Jim's outing as a big movie for Jim McKinney with the giant rubber.
I didn't realize it was him. I'll watch that one. I haven't seen that yet. With where people are ice fishing.
Ice fishing, and we got Rooker.
Okay. Yeah, I saw your name on it, and I didn't see the one.
Yeah, I played.
Are you in it?
I played the TV. I'm on the thing for 3 seconds, but it's worth getting the DVD to see the whole outtake of me. I'm like, I'm having a fishing show here. Well, we always go out here and fly fishing, and it's so absurd.
I will say about Jim though, like Jim Mickle, it's unusual to clearly see the progress of a director with each film. Usually it's like, oh, you have your head, and then maybe you take a step back, and then the next one. Yeah. Each film, it's just been that like increment better. You're seeing a guy really master what he's up to.
That's Jim's first movie.
I love Mulberry Street.
Yeah.
Which you're in, right?
Which,
Oh, I am in. Yeah, because Mickle and I were sort of flirting for quite a long time. We tried to do a vampire movie that was based on a book, and then the rights dried up. And so he was a very sweet kid who came, and the irony is that the first stuff he was talking to me about was Cold in July, and he had Harvey Keitel, and he was like, you got to come to a reading, man. We're going to have Harvey there. Stuff didn't work out, and, I kept getting updates, and then came this idea of doing Stakeland, because we all saw Mulberry Street when we went to Sitges with Glenn's movie, and just a great guy, and Nick D'Amici, of course, awesome. So that's how Stakeland came around.
And Nick's in the late phases?
Nick's the star of late phases.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one. It looks good, though. Werewolf one.
Yeah, I've said about, I love Mulberry Street, but like Stakeland feels like he skipped 4 movies ahead into his career. Like,
Stakeland's awesome. If you guys haven't seen
forward.
Stakeland yet, speaking to our listeners, it's definitely check it out.
Same with We Are What We Are. We Are What We Are?
We are what we are.
Shadows?
That's right.
No, what was
We Are What We Are.
His remake, because I actually love the original of that, but the last 15 minutes of his one, like of that year, that was the best 15 minutes of film I saw.
Yeah.
Like up to that, I was like, oh, that's pretty good. And then the last 15 minutes happened, I was just like, I don't even know what to say right now. It was just so surprising and violent and grotesque, but, always beautifully shot.
His soundtrack for that, the soundtrack that they included, it was amazing.
Jeff Grace.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good old Jeff Grace.
Secret weapon.
Speaking of the legacy of the whole thing is that, Peter Polk, who's done most of these movies, worked with Ty West. He's a producer. He produced Glenn's movie. He had met this character, Jeff Grace, in a film festival or something. And, he kept the number, which we all do, but rarely is there that follow-through.
Yeah.
But we called Jeff and said, do you want to do this little movie called The Roost? It's a lot of Penderecki kind of, on the violin and just a really crazy string score or whatever, and so he did the Roost score, which is spectacular, rarely been topped in a way. And then I used him on my film The Last Winter, and he wrote this gorgeous music for that, including one of his signature sort of sounds, which he used in many films since. This kind of repeating piano, very very haunting, simple thing. And then we used him for Glenn's movie, and you guys had a pretty cool collaboration.
Yeah, Jeff is cool. I mean, I knew what I wanted, a real Ennio Morricone kind of wacky vibe for I Sell the Dead, just to emphasize how crazy Willie Grimes and Arthur Blake were. So he got into it immediately. We'd listened to a lot of old 60s Morricone, psychedelia, and Jeff's kind of a square guy, so it's interesting to sit with him and Jeff, imagine you're on acid now. You're just listening to this and just really shooting the shit with him and opening him up to new music. I mean, we listened to a lot of strange music working up to I Saw the Dead.
And Glenn would always say, well, this is great, but what if there's a saw in here? Or have we thought about a whistle?
Yeah.
So he kept just adding the weirdest crap. And then the good thing is that Jeff's game. But it is true. He's square in the sense that he's also so classically trained. It's really exciting, and it's fun to talk to him. I love saying, so what was Schubert's, what contribution? And he'll do, Schubert, of course, brought the A minor chord and the dissonance in the third movement. And it was really so it's always fun for me to talk, and then I can give him some sort of classical reference. Say this one Tchaikovsky, there's like 3 bars from there. Can we just steal it? And and he knows all that stuff, and it's really fun to.
I think with horror you can get away with amazing music as well.
Yeah,
it's so great to see the likes of Death Waltz. And is also Mondo? Are they bringing that?
Mondo,
Mondo and Death Waltz are kind of together.
Waxworks.
Waxworks.
One Way Static.
One Way Static has some really good ones.
They're all doing great stuff.
Sometimes you forget what it is until you isolate it.
I recently picked up the Creepshow on vinyl, and it's stunning.
Yeah, Waxworks are nice.
I never paid attention to Chopping Mall until I got
have
that.
it. It's fabulous.
Let Sleeping Corpses Lie. Both of those, you just watch the movie and you're kind of just, this is a fun film. And
the one I did was
until I separated
The Hills Have Eyes.
Yeah, they make me
I've
really
never thought
appreciate
about that soundtrack. Unbelievable.
The fact that they keep coming out makes me think, do I like the music from that movie? I don't even remember. And then you buy Chopping Mall, and you're like, this is kind of awesome.
This is kind of awesome music.
It's interesting. Getting back to, this and also character in horror, I watched Let's Scare Jessica to Death last week.
That one of the great hippie horrors.
Beautiful and a wonderful performance by Zora Lambert, who just reels you in and you're with her through her perspective as she's unraveling. Wonderful inner dialogue from her. But the score is absolutely stunning.
Yes.
It's never been released, and it's this weird hippie vibe, but also it's got this early electronic thumping sound. It's almost like an early Doctor Who.
I was going to say Jethro
BBC.
Tullish, but yeah.
What is that? But there's just this really, I don't know, I'm sure we've all seen The Legend of Hell House, which is the scores by Delia Derbyshire, who actually scored a lot of the old BBC shows, including Doctor Who, the Doctor Who theme. But it's this haunting, I guess it's hauntology. There's a whole genre of this music out now, which is this dull, creepy, thudding, monolithic, blunt electronic music, or not even music, but percussion, coupled with Jessica to Death, coupled with this kind of crazy, almost Wicker Man style hippie
and sometimes
music.
it's not the best films. That's the thing, and so you still want somebody to recognize it and put it out. Like for
Absolutely.
me, we had Death Waltz here, and I kept saying "Shock" by Bava. Shock has the best. I mean, I'm flat out my favorite score ever. Go online, go on YouTube, and you put in Shock, and you're like, oh yeah, this is one. But no one's gonna ever know because no one's gonna watch the movie. It was on the double with Possession on the second part. No one's watching it.
But it's got a great scene in it where it's the
got
scene that they
scenes,
actually used in Annabelle, where
with
she's
jump
running
scare,
and she changes age.
But it's just
seen
what
it.
you realize about music, especially some of the Italian stuff, is you have this amazing stuff that's just going to get lost without these companies going to rediscover and put it out.
My favorite soundtrack ever, it hasn't been, I think it's on tape. I have not seen it on vinyl anywhere, but Cannibal Ferox.
Wow.
I mean,
One Way Static put it out
They
on vinyl.
did, okay. It had to have been, it wasn't a limited, because I tried to buy that thing.
It's out
Probably
there.
like 500
Okay.
bucks.
Just came out, and they just announced they're teaming. One Way Static is teaming up with Death Waltz for Cannibal Holocaust.
Ooh, see, Cannibal Holocaust is pretty, but that's it. It's pretty. It's very pretty and somber and almost kind of
it's
dirge-like.
one of the but it's one of the greatest pieces of music in the history.
It's very iconic.
The way it runs in contrast to that movie, there's
true.
nothing like it. I
why
remember watching this going, somehow it is drawing me closer and being completely repulsed at the same time.
Yeah.
That is almost impossible.
Really? It's
only in a movie I think you
it's
can do that.
incongruous to what it's...
classical.
Yeah,
It's incongruous to the
It only
footage?
plays that particular part of the score, which is the most beautiful part, as they're going into the darkest stuff, so whether it's the turtle or something, and then it plays. There's a couple other weird parts.
The most
of the score.
beautiful song in the entire movie.
Yeah,
it's like this lullaby. But Cannibal Ferox I love because whereas that is doing this very classical score with these gruesome images, Cannibal Ferox is like a funk soundtrack. It is so bizarre.
Yeah, there's a little bit of funk in Holocaust too, but I just love that imagination to run things in contrast to each other. Because Rob probably doesn't care because he got to ask all the questions yesterday. we should have it. I do want to start back at Habit a little bit now that we're going backwards in our show. We started at the end today, worked into Glass Eye Pix, and now we're going to go back to the
I've been waiting all day to ask about I Sell the Dead. So
let's start back.
We're going to get there. We're going back to Habit. I'm eating candy corn.
But no, some of the stories are really fascinating. And I find watching Habit again, I'd maybe forgotten just how subjective it was. It's that. And when you mentioned Polanski being an influence, it made total sense to me. Tenet and Repulsion are two of my favorite films. But your character because you're in it, is actually more alive than any of the characters in Polanski film. You have, especially in that film, it just feels completely like a fresh take. I have no idea how somebody can direct a movie and act in it. And I don't know how you know what you're doing is good, besides just complete trust in the people you're working with.
Yeah, I was totally intrigued by that, because I can't direct and, text somebody at the same time. I get really confused. I don't even know how you would be able to manage, because you also edited it, you wrote it.
Yeah.
This was you.
And I did the makeup. I'm very proud of the makeup. It's very good blend.
Wow.
Did you?
Yeah. Well, it's a really special movie in that I was close to the character, obviously. I was sort of commenting on aspects of my life, and it was just really fun I can't explain it. It was like performance. Well, it is performance, but just to get in there and behave. It's almost like The Method in terms of that. Even though, people have asked, is it improv and so on? No, it's scripted to the letter, and everybody was, on their game. And yeah. I think I referenced last night, the thing that's cool when you're acting in your own movie, you can almost sort of direct, or you can at least sort of throw a few little curveballs to the other actors, and that might be something that'll inspire them and get some spontaneity into the running. But ultimately, it was very controlled. Maybe some moments in the dinner party scene and stuff with Nick, the other character, but very scripted. And just a very special privilege to get a team of guys who are everyone's looking out for each other. The DP had a good eye. Once again, I'm very controlling, so I tell him exactly what I wanted, but then he would take it from there, and he would offer his own insights. And, they would say, I'd say, is that a good take, and can we move on? This was film, so, 3 takes in, and you're going to move on anyway. But, is there anything we've done wrong? Is the mic and the shot, was that just unbelievable? So it was fun.
Do you have that innate... Because obviously, say you're directing Wendigo, it's different because you're not in the frame. Do you have an innate sense when you finish a take, I think I got it, or do you or do you have that? When you act for other people, as Larry Fessenden, the actor, obviously you suffer what all actors suffer, which is almost humiliation. And as an actor, you don't know if what you're doing is good, and you're looking for approval in a sense. So. Right.
Well, the nice thing is that, as I say, I felt pretty in it. So unless I felt deeply dishonest in a certain take, I really was forcing that, I'd love to try it again and make it flow more naturally. The weirder thing is that you're trying to look after your other person because you're supposedly in it and you're doing the scene, and then you come out and you go, I just feel like maybe you should be a little more aggressive in that shot, or in that take. So that becomes its own thing when you're sort of directing, because the premise is that you're so into your character, you're not thinking about the other thing. But you do still have to kind of watch. And you might say, Frank, I put the bottle down at the wrong time. We should just go again, because every other time I put it down here, and it's just going to screw us up. And people would say, wow, you're tracking that? And you're like, well, yeah, it's all part. I always love this story that Gary Oldman has perfect muscle memory, which means he always knows when to put the thing down. He does it the same exact every time. And it's just to say there are all these things that make for a professional, a person that people like to work with. And one of them is just that simple thing of just knowing the continuity. You kind of map it out in your mind. You're going to do it each time. Having said that, of course, you watch a De Niro movie, which is to say a Scorsese movie, and it's so fun because the cigarette's in all the wrong places, and you realize they're so deep in another way that they're actually just each time it's completely fresh. And what I love is that in the editing, Thelma Schumacher and Marty are not choosing for continuity. They're choosing for frickin' performance and vibe. And that's a great lesson. And there are all those kind of lessons that are so fun as you do get to learn about cinema. There's the Hitchcock way of filming, there's the Scorsese way, and blah, blah, blah. And there are all these great people to borrow from and to learn from what their priorities are. And then you sort of make a set of priorities on your own set.
You guys almost feel. I watched Wendigo again. I loved Wendigo. I saw it like when it came out, and I saw it again this morning, and it felt
this morning.
No, I didn't.
That's his homework.
I watched it this morning, but it reminded me of like what modern expressionism might be. Like it's about a mood piece. It's about a feeling. It's about the whole, not breaking it down to the individual. So it's not like the story beats. It's like, no, now the scene kind of goes in slow motion, and then suddenly we have this slightly animated sequence, and then the sound comes forward earlier. It was very interesting to me. It felt like as close as we get to modern expression without being lighting expression.
This freedom. I was in a bitter mood, as I usually am, and I just was like, I want to make something that's actually expressionistic, and I'll use the excuse that it's from the child's point of view, and even my monster, I'm going to make it out of paper mache if I need to. I've used that word like 4 times today. It's crazy.
Paper mache?
Yeah, I mean, what's going on? But I feel like that was really the agenda, like to just bust open the film, and you know, I've sort of had a lot of rants at the time about the literalness of American movies. And as CGI was coming in, which I like CGI like the rest of us, I love Godzilla, it looks great. But there's something that means everything has to look realistic. And I was sort of like, you know what? No, everything has to feel an emotion. You have to experience it. So let's do the opposite. Let's have puppets on strings and see if we can still bring the audience into a world. And you know, let's have this kind of animation, which just feels like I don't know what, but that was the agenda there.
I like that I couldn't figure out how it was done, too.
Yeah,
unlike CGI.
Basically animating. You put the tripod here, you take 3 frames, pick the tripod up, put it
Move
over
it
here,
forward.
refocus, take 3 frames. It would take, and I'd send my guy out, Jay Silver, to do all this B-roll. And he'd go out with, like, you know, a copy of War and Peace, and he'd come back after 7 hours, and he'd have 3 seconds of film, like of just the woods going.
Yeah, that's cool.
So
Yeah,
it was really,
I wanted to, you know, since you brought up Wendigo, I just wanted to talk about it really briefly because, you know, the thing that's interesting about doing the show in general is, you know, we always have our memories of seeing movies for the first time, and then, you know, as a person that grows, your perspective on the world changes. You remember movies a different way. You revisit them, and all of a sudden they speak a different language to you. So I remember when Wendigo came out. But for some reason, I recently revisited it before he came to town, and like it just spoke to me way more now as an adult at this point in my life than before. And a lot of it has to do with just the sense of dread that begins right from the first scene when there's the confrontation between Jake Weber's character and his family and the hunters. I guess,
even him within his family a little.
Oh, yeah.
Like he feels
sure.
a little out of place in his family.
I gotta say,
like
I feel like that movie. Well, I'm just going to say it doesn't matter if it's true. You know, I think it holds up because it deals with the issue of sort of red state, blue state. You know, the privileged New Yorkers come up and they confront these kind of gun-toting guys, and then there's clearly an economic strain in the family. The father's way stressed out. He's sort of forgetting what is important, which is his relationship with his kid and his wife. So that stuff is really relevant today. We're all stressing.
Yeah.
And it's about manhood. You know, the father feels unmanly, and you know he gets his work out, and it's literally a close-up of his sneaker, and he's got to take this very seriously, and he's got to assert himself at work. You know, this sneaker looks good. It's pathetic. You know, it's the modern man. In fact, the whole movie starts with a werewolf fighting a robot, and it's like the old visceral world of, you know, animalistic reality versus, you know, the modern world. So that's been an obsession of mine, I think, in general. And
I definitely didn't pick that theme at this time,
really?
but I loved it. I love the close-ups.
It's a great opening.
That's funny that
hate to reveal my simple-minded imagery, but that's always been my favorite notion, you know.
Yeah.
No, you said the word I was looking for was relevant. It feels more relevant seeing it now than it ever has. And, you know, one of the things I wanted to mention, I remember emailing you, and you were pleasantly surprised by this. I did the podcast for The Following last season, and Jake Weber was a guest star.
Oh, yeah, dude, that was so meaningful.
We had him come in, and me and Scott Reynolds, who did that show, were huge fans of Wendigo. So, of course, we hounded him before we even started. And he said, he's like, that's still to this day my favorite movie I've ever done and my favorite character.
Oh, so
and,
sweet.
And we got him to say it on air. And I remember emailing you. He's like, I didn't think he remembered that fucking movie. That's amazing.
I think that's for me why Wendigo was and still very relevant, is that it's full of real characters, and the family dynamic you built, very quickly you're there with them all. Yes, they're, you know, these wealthy, you know, New Yorkers come into this small town, and there are the backwood guys, but quickly you get past all of that. And I think at one stage you even comment on the fact of that Patricia Clarkson's perception of these backwood characters is really her downfall in the entire movie, because at one stage they offer her help and she gets frightened by them, and she's like, I'm out of here.
Well, I really tried to play off of all of that. Like the hunter played by John Spiridakis. I mean, when people were auditioning, they'd come in with their hick accents, and I'll never forget this one guy, kind of charming. He came in with a 6-pack, and he started opening it, and I remember thinking, so much for your career, dude. This is just inappropriate. But I liked it anyway. Most of them came in and they were like, mustache twitching, damn redneck types. But when Spiridakis did it, it came from a sort of a kind of a desperation. It came from a very honest place that was about his pain and resentments, and I immediately said, this is much more interesting, or this is what I'm looking for, because it's not really supposed to draw red state blue lines. That's my resentment about today's politics, because we're doing that, whereas in fact everybody has a gripe. Like the whole point of that story is that this house used to be his. He grew up there. I mean, it's heartbreaking, but then the parents died, they sold it, and now yuppies moved in, or whatever we're calling them. Anyway, so whatever. It was, to me, was about the characterizations was first and foremost.
I was always curious, because watching it again recently, I see a lot of you, I think, in the main story. Like, all your movies seem personal to you in some respect. Was there any ever thought of you actually playing that role? Or after Habit, did you decide, I need somebody else, I need to focus?
I mean, it is me. In a way, the dad is the most me in terms of his dilemma of masculinity. But I would say the real irony is that I'm also the kid, because that was my life. I would get scared at night, and I would go and stand outside my parents' door literally for hours, and I would never have the heart to wake them up and say, I'm scared. So I would just stand there as if I'm not sure what I was waiting for. Quite honestly, I was waiting for the dawn, which is kind of pathetic. But that's
scary shit. Like, I remember really recently, like a few weeks ago, woke up in the middle of the night, don't know why, looked up, and my fucking kid, my 3-year-old, was standing on the edge of the bed. I was like,
I guess the same thing. Marnie isn't old enough to crawl out of her crib yet, but I'll wake up in the middle of the night, because the monitor's like right there next to my head. I'll roll over and glance at it out of habit. She'll be standing up in the middle of the crib, just looking around, staring.
Dude,
and I'm
that's
like,
total paranormal activity. That's insane.
But I think, it speaks that they're not obviously trying to be creepy, but it speaks to our fears of not understanding what we aren't. If we're not a kid anymore, we can't understand.
Well, everything's a mystery. I think Wendigo does a great job of that. You see the kid learning. It's all about the kid's perception.
Definitely. And it's about misunderstanding, like what you've, like stimulus, right? You see something, and then filtered through a kid, an accident or killing is so different to how they process something than a logical mind.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because what I really think it is you're literally seeing the building of a myth. Like he's just going about his business, and then some Indian gives him a figure, and the figure kind of has antlers, and then he sees a dead deer, and he's like, oh my God, that's so spooky. And then he sort of creates this idea of like, this avenging deer monster, because my dad got shot, somebody's going to come to my rescue. So it's really a movie about how we need religion and mythology to sort of make sense of absolutely arbitrary events.
And you forgot of a key plot point: an Indian with Larry Fessenden's voice.
Which will freak out
any child will be disturbed by something.
But it was funny working with that kid, because
the kid from Malcolm in the Middle.
Yeah,
that's
he was
right.
on Malcolm in the Middle.
And he was
expressive
so
face,
adult for his age, and I would have to explain. I'd say, dude, I called him little man. I said, little man, you gotta be afraid in this scene. He's like, of what? Dude, of the dark. What do you mean of what? And so I was such a kid on that set, just trying to get
afraid of the director.
Yeah,
I swear that's just kid actors in general, because anytime I meet a kid actor here in LA, I mean, like, they're more professional than I am. So.
Oh, exactly. He knew his lines better than the adults. The whole thing was fun.
Yeah. Oh. I wanted to talk a little bit about the evolution of both your working relationship with Glenn, between the two of you, because I just I was surprised when I revisited The Roost recently as well for Halloween to see your name in the credits, and I'm like, oh, I didn't realize Glenn was kind of in the circle that far back. So after The Roost, what was the next thing that kind of forged your working relationship together?
Well, for the true heroic listeners who've been listening for the last, what has it been, 3 hours now?
No, this is half a show.
Short.
You guys are halfway through right now.
Well,
I have half beer left. Okay, half show left.
I'm so digging the refreshments. So the deal is that, yes, we met on at a party, but the point is that I asked Glenn to do the bats for the roost, and that was a great experience. And then I finally got my own movie going called The Last Winter, and we were going to film not in Alaska where it's set, but in fact in Iceland, which had a much better film community, and we felt like we could get crews. And I invited Glenn to come, which was so fun because he was a great comrade. And, you know, the nice thing about The Last Winter is I had a really cool producer, Jeff Levy-Hinty. He had done Wendigo. The Last Winter was sort of, in our minds, a sequel of some sort. And we set out, we went to Iceland, and we hired an entirely Icelandic crew, including the DP, which is usually not the case. Usually an American, for comfort, will bring their comrades. And I thought, you know what, let's just be bold and let's get these guys. They're going to know the light. They're going to know the crew, and it's going to be cool. And you know what? It absolutely gave us so much cred because it meant that we trusted them. And these are really tough Vikings.
Sure,
you know,
I think we won them over very early
by
that choice. Yeah,
and also because Glenn's so charming. So
it feels like a big movie to me. Like I remember in your filmography, that felt like the big movie.
Yeah, I remember. I was at the premiere of it in New York.
That's so sweet.
It was at the IFC.
Yeah.
Was it? Yeah, IFC Center in New York, and I got to go to the premiere, and I was so excited because it was like a huge film. And I remember that we were doing Fango Radio at the time, and I remember talking about it on that week's show about how, because you came on, about how it was like, you know, your big picture. So,
it was a big picture, and you know, we got Ron Perlman. It was amazing, and James LeGros. And Connie Britton, ironically, she's become really a big name in her own right. But also Kevin Corrigan, a lot of great, Jamie Harold, really fun bit players or whatever you call them, character actors. So
but it's still completely, like, it's still identifiable completely with your films, because once you have the build up, just like, say, The Thing or something. But when you get to that last act, it falls in line with Wendigo, falls in line with Habit. It's that same thing. Once the actual monsters or the spirits are revealed, it all makes sense to the way you view films, which is partially that the storytelling is revealed a little bit, that you're thinking about fables or stories rather than, I guess that's whole point in my mind right now is that unlike where we are with most movies now, where they just want you to not think that there's movies. You're just, here's some spectacle, watch it 2 hours. Okay, you're done. See you guys later next week. It's like you actually are pointing out, no, there's something to do with myths, and
that's because I really think it's our belief system that is in play, and you can both enjoy it, tell the tale, but also say, look, this is just what we believe, and it's trying to undermine our assumptions in daily life. That's everybody goes around, well, I see it through the Fox News eyes, and I'm saying, yeah, that's exactly the point. You see it through the Fox News eyes. That's just a belief system. It isn't reality. Let's always be aware of how we're interpreting. So there's always that element of like, yes, we're going to tell the story, engage you fully, but also know that it's all this subjective experience. Even in Last Winter, I try to show that James LeGros, who's the environmentalist, and you would think, that's the filmmaker's perspective. But I'm also showing he's fucking crazy. I mean, he's despairing. He has a sense of loss that is actually unraveling him. So even though he's, on the one hand, the voice of reason, he's also losing it. I hope that's clear, and you see his diary, and it gets darker and darker and bleaker and bleaker. And then in the meanwhile, Ron Perlman, who is presumably the villain, he's the oil man, but the fact is he's kind of a rallying guy, and he kind of has a spirit, and he's keeping people going. So I'm trying to blur what your allegiances are presumably supposed to be. Anyway, so I got Glenn there to be the effects supervisor, and we'd come
I crept in as the visual effects coordinator, and I think 2 days into Iceland, you shook my hand and gave me the job of being the second unit director,
which was really fun,
which was pretty remarkable. But it was a great crew. The Icelandic guys and girls were just fantastic. They would often not speak English. They would just be nattering away to themselves in Icelandic. I have no idea what they were saying, but we became...
I do. I found out. And the AD, who I loved, her name was Gaga before there was Gaga.
Yeah.
And And apparently she would say, if you don't get Ron Perlman here in 5 minutes, I'm going to go and murder all your children and tear up your wife's, face. They were just such awesomely, this biting sense of humor, this kind of Viking. I could say it no differently. Also, speaking of drink, oh my God, Glenn and I think it took 2 years to recover.
Yeah. It was rough.
You just have a couple of bevies after the shoot and you realize, oh my God, we got to get up in an hour. What have we been doing? We drank 17 beers.
Everyone worked very, very hard, insanely hard in those conditions. I mean, the cameras were freezing. Some days it was just a whiteout. And I actually still have, I got frostbite on one of my toes.
Oh, no.
So after this, we would all just get hammered at the bar. And there was this weird Icelandic tradition of grown men, which is a homosexual, it was kind of cute, just pulling their pants down at the bar and just nonchalantly continuing to drink,
That was a commonplace thing.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Let's be real, guys.
Too bad it's radio.
It's not a real show until Elric gets naked.
I'm all for no pants. No, I'm sure what they were really saying is, Jack Nicholson, much better director now than when he made 2J. He looks a little frazzled, but he's good.
Very hard work and very hard partying bunch. But Jesus Christ, by the end of the shoot, I was unraveling. I had to change my flight to go back to New York so I could go back to my mother in Ireland and just recuperate for a few weeks.
Wow.
How did you become American? How did you come to America? What made you want to leave Ireland? Was it the film industry?
I came over on a student visa, J1 visa, and I wanted to get some experience in visual effects. There wasn't much going on in Ireland, and I met a company called Quiet Man, and they liked me enough to sponsor me for a H1, which is a professional sponsorship visa. And Quiet Man, I was with Quiet Man when I met Larry, and we delved into the Roost, and it's just been sort of one thing or another. Then fell in love, and broke up. Then fell in love again, and got married. And
with or not with Larry?
No, well, always.
Come on,
that's a daily event.
We do have an announcement.
We have
Please out.
I'll tell you what, though, in all honesty, to know Larry really is to love him. I mean, he's an infectious character and very generous. And I mean, I know you know me, 10 years now, good and bad times, always by each other's side. So it's just remarkable to find people like him.
Well, one thing that came really clear about why I probably responded to your work so much without knowing. I saw Wendigo before I saw Habit, and kind of going back when I got to Habit, I realized I was watching like a real artist's work, not just a filmmaker's work. And it came last night when Rob was doing a Q&A, and it was you talking about having friends who were in performance art. Mm-hmm. And that idea of films not needing to be perfect because they have to make money and because they have all these expectations, it's just you do it because it's an expression. And that really resonates with me and why I've always been drawn to the art form, but why maybe in the last few years I've been kind of like, I don't know if that exists. I'm not 100% sure right now if that is where we're at. Sure. But you talking about it like, hey, we just do it. If we have to get naked for a scene, we just do it because we're running down the street in New York. And
let's just get naked.
That made me feel really
made me inspired. Man?
It inspired me because like a lot of that work, I worked at the Chicago database for a while where they did all the video art. And I'd watch that stuff and I'd get more inspired by that to make narrative films than I would from narrative movies because it's something different. And it's not pegged in a...
I love what you're saying, and I mean, I'm maybe going to take it in the wrong direction, but it's similarly, I read nonfiction. It's funny, I sort of like all the different things besides narrative film to inspire. One of the problems of recent years is that the kids are so educated about movies that you get on a set and it's always like, let's do this scene from that. And, that's fair because we're all cinephiles and presumably we're referencing things that we care about and love. But I also want to say, no, let's do this scene like a painting by De Chirico. Let's do this. I'm really passionate to tell this thing that I've read about that's this weird fungus, this scientific thing. And similarly, to draw from what performance art, and for that matter, performance in general, and obviously we're here to also talk about our radio shows and just, to draw from these other art forms and not get into this box. It's very monochromatic, the way films are now. And honestly, what's most tragic is that all they talk about is budgets. Mm-hmm. All we know about is how much Jason Blum's movies cost and how much they make. And isn't that just dazzling? And,
well, if that's the first question in a Q&A,
yeah, well,
you're in trouble.
Yeah,
right?
It's always what was the budget
or what was it shot on?
I think that was the first question in the one that we saw 2 weekends ago.
Just depressing. Yeah. It's oppressing.
It's just tiresome. And, when I grew up, more to the point is, you never knew the budget of anything. Mm-hmm. You knew that The Godfather was a hit because it was still there in theaters a year later. And, they would every now and again say, we passed $100 million, which was unheard of, But more to the point, now everybody knows the top 10 movies because it's in the New York Post. It's on IMDb. Every kid, my kid included, is completely savvy what number people are and so on and so on. You can't say, I love this actor without quickly looking up and going, oh, well, they're only, 3,000. I don't really know what to. So, it's just like we've commodified everything in our lives, quite honestly, including how many tweets do you guys have? How many followers do you guys have? Because I don't even know if I want to stay here much longer.
The truth is only in America.
Oh, yeah.
We've done that. So anywhere else, no one's thinking about that when they're casting or when they're thinking about. And that's the weird thing. It's like it's a labeling thing. Like I don't know about in Ireland, but I know in New Zealand and places people don't label alcoholism, depression.
Well, I think you know why they label it because then they can sell you a cure. This is the
that's
thing.
What I'm saying.
Everything is commodified in this country.
Exactly.
And let's make a horror picture about that.
Well, it's labels. It's a labeled society.
I discovered this reason. I had a discussion with somebody at Screamfest on Wednesday of last week. How so many actors in LA are now having to come up with new names for themselves because their name will be taken on IMDb. So instead of being Jenny Barton, you have to be Jenny Ann Barton because there's already a Jenny Barton on IMDb. Wow. So you're completely changing your identity to accommodate
a website.
This website.
That's all it is. The website.
Because
actors.
you can't be the same.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's tough to stay inspired by cinema these days. For me, over the past few years, I have questioned the love for certainly current work.
But not beer.
And certainly not beer, as I'm handed a Guinness.
Current,
I was inspired by what David Lynch did after Dune, and he was sort of blacklisted for a while.
Yeah.
No one wanted to touch him. And so he started developing a TV show, Twin Peaks, So he took his work where he could and found inspiration where he could. And I just wanted to get into talking about Tales from Beyond the Pale because how long are we doing this now, Larry? It's just
I'm bad with dates.
4 years probably?
Yeah, maybe
4
so.
years now into Tales from Beyond the Pale. And yes, the initial kind of impetus was to be able to make content quite cheaply and to go to different environments and worlds and characters that we just wouldn't have been able to do with the budgets that it takes to make these audio dramas. And so on top of that, it just also became a new avenue for us to explore, to listen to some of the older radio plays and to get inspired with storytelling, because to me that's the reason why I'm doing it still to this day. And the filmmakers that I love the most are really value the art and the tradition of storytelling. And just getting back to I Sell the Dead, beyond it being a movie about grave robbers, it's a movie about storytelling, and that's just something I grew up with in Ireland. And creating a collection of stories has always been a very special idea to me. I mean, I Sell the Dead is basically an anthology movie. I use the same antagonists and protagonists throughout, but they're completely different genres within that movie. So the idea of moving away from cinema for inspiration for me at the time was very much needed. I was kind of burnt out. I was trying to make follow-up to I Sell the Dead, and the scripts weren't selling, or there were not enough bites. So there was just a very kind of a rabid desire for me to shift gears, but stay within the world of getting stories out there. So,
was there a specific influence on that type of storytelling? That kind of like Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, that kind of stuff. Was there something else out there for horror that you drew from?
Honestly, growing up, I just think a lot of the women in my life when I was growing up with my mom, my sister, my aunts, grandmothers, there was just a tradition of conversation and remembering and talking about your granddad, or now we'll talk about my father, and so there's just a very rich tradition of. And now just what I really do miss, maybe do about New Zealand, but when I go back to Ireland, just go down to the local pub, play darts, and just catch up and tell stories. And there's still a tradition of that is try and take with me wherever I go. So it's
verbal history. Like it's passed on through the verbal storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely. I love, as Larry was talking about earlier, just mythology, and I love shifting mythologies as well as we move on and we make our own mythologies. That to me is kind of inspiring. So the idea with Tales from Beyond the Pale and getting these audio dramas out there was as much driven with the idea of gathering as well as telling, to reaching out to people like Paul Solid and Simon Rumley, from
Simon
Barrett, all the Simons, Graham Resnick, and just the idea of curating a collection of tales and having a collection of 10 tales take on its own identity that's bigger than any one of the tales. If that makes sense.
I've always said, and I use all these terminologies, whatever, that's my shtick, you'll have to say in the end, but I really believe in this sort of community, and it comes back to what you were bringing up earlier about performance artists and that sort of camaraderie that comes from being in a really dingy little dressing room and people are putting on their giant silly costumes and they're going to go out and just be frickin' raw and try to express something in a way that doesn't happen in most movies, because movies are obviously trying to present things with the realism and whatever. So there's a zaniness, a sense of imagination. Tom Murin, David Leslie, Pat Olesko, these are names you wouldn't know, and that's part of the charm. They're absolutely known in New York City, or at least in like some great a chronology of Franklin Furnace or PS 122. But Steve Buscemi and Mark Boone Jr. Mark Boone Jr. is now in Sons of Anarchy. Steve Buscemi is Steve Buscemi. These guys started out as two comedians doing these goofy 10-minute pieces in a roster of other crazy performance guys. And there was that sense of community, and I always wanted to take that and make a film company that had that same vibe. And, of course, you still want to reverberate out and get onto the big screens and get distribution, but sort of maintain that and in a way inspire the next round of kids who feel like misfits, who just want to put on, their mother's dresses or whatever you want to do as a kid and be kooky and come out and be honest and say, this is my shit. So that's always been, even as I try to play with the big boys and try to make a Hollywood film with Guillermo del Toro, there's still part of me that wants to find that in the people I work with. And that's been so beautiful. I think that Glenn will agree that, Ron Perlman, in a way, he came into our world. He worked on The Last Winter, and I think he liked the spirit with which I directed and just made that into a fun experience. It's just a gig for him. But then that translated to us inviting him to be involved in Glenn's movie. And he sort of read the script and he said, well, I'm not sure the character has really enough for me to be there. Guys, why, what do you want? Just me for my name? And we're like, no, Ron, we want you because you're Ron, and we had such an amazing experience in Iceland. And Glenn went back to the drawing board and he was inspired by this comment to sort of reimagine what that character could be. And, without spoiler alert, it turned that character into a more significant part of the story.
Right.
And in a way, it was a collaboration. And then we got Ron. He came after I saw Hellboy 2. Been really beat up by Guillermo. They went at it, head to head, because Guillermo was shooting in order and making the whole thing a nightmare. And, these I can say because they're dear friends. But, always combating. And he was exhausted with, the stress of making this movie. And he just came and we put him on a frickin' ferny pad in the corner of a dingy...
it wasn't even a ferny pad, it was a crate.
That's right. And we said, here, Ron, join us. This is how we do it, And,
he was fantastic. I mean,
he
just... I think his MO, and I'm reading his book right now, is to just be, to be, the guy who's like sweeping up the set, he just wants to be treated no different to anyone else. And I remember thinking, God, yeah, he's a bit knackered after Hellboy 2. And on our first day together, I think there was a little moment where we had a little interaction where I wasn't sure, Jesus, I think Ron thinks I'm a fucking asshole. Anyway, that night he wrote to me and just wrote this beautiful email to me saying, you're doing a great job and I'm super excited to get back to you tomorrow. And it was just a beautiful thing. He understood where I was at, and I'll never forget that email. I still have it, actually. And he wrote a lovely letter to me after the end of the filming and so on. So he's a great character. And
You
yes,
never wrote me any of these fucking emails. What is this? These nice little emails
I'll
from
read you
Ron
mine.
Perlman. I get nothing.
I'll read you mine.
Jeez Louise.
But yeah, it's cool. I think that Larry's created this community, and it definitely does stem from the arts in New York. It's interesting that people are. I remember around the time of I Sell the Dead, I think that was the moment where Glass Eye Pix was sort of becoming a brand, a bigger brand that people were talking about, and so on. So it's been cool to see it stem from the 1980s the East Village art scene to here.
Definitely.
Yeah, in terms of Tales from Beyond the Pale, I have a wonderful memory of that whole first season, because I think it was a couple years back whenever I first started at FearNet, and I had the massive 2-hour commute, all day to get there and get back. And that's when I was like, oh, you know what? I'm going to finally tackle this season 1 of this show. And it was great because it was around October. I just started in October. So I listened to one episode on the way there, one episode on the way back. And every day I was like, I can't wait to go to work so I get to hear another one of these episodes.
Love that.
And I'm not all the way through season 2 because I don't drive as much as I used to, but I did drive to Arizona recently, and it was kind of unsettling. I forget the title, but it's the Frankenstein story that you're in.
Yeah.
Like Father, Like Son.
By
Let me
Clay
tell you,
McQuaid Chapman.
hearing a giant car crash.
Clay McLeod Chapman. Forgive me. Clay and Glenn.
He writes for us. He writes for Fango.
Oh, well, he's just...
Clay? He's a fantastic
Yeah, he's
character.
a great guy.
But
he's from the same area I am in Virginia, so we go way back.
Oh, nice.
So.
Yeah, so no, just hearing a giant car crash, because sound design is obviously hearing a car crash when you're in the desert for 4 hours straight is kind of unsettling. And you're like, shit, was that real? It's just the thing I'm listening to. But no, it's been a lot of fun, and I
That's a huge inspiration for us, by the way. The idea that we put these tales out and we have no idea where people are going to listen to them. So it's kind of, we riff on it a little bit at the start of each play. Perhaps you're...
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, maybe you're in the gym. And then we have some disaster in the gym. Maybe. Well, we have some fun ones planned for the LA show.
Do you have to rehearse at the venue? Say you're at Cinefamily, are you going to rehearse tonight or
We
something?
should be rehearsing right now.
What's going to be sound effects and everything? Or?
Oh, yeah. No, we really have special
earlier.
treats
Timing and everything.
in mind for that. And... But, I mean, what I want to say, and I know Glenn will agree, is that we...
Because you own me.
Yes, we really are one and the same person. Oh, yeah.
Because he owned you.
Is that we're inspired, of course, by the old-timey radios. And, Boris Karloff had a show with Peter Lorre visiting, and there's obviously Orson Welles. Hitchcock had a...
I just bought a Hitchcock record, which is amazing.
Spectacular.
Yeah.
So the one where he's dealing with the plumbing the whole time?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, dude, that was in fact, if I had to say the origin of my audio thing, the cool thing about that is I listened to them on the radio as well, but I loved putting on this record and hearing Hitch, who was even then somewhat of a hero, and they're really cool stories, some of them longer than others. But anyway, all of that being the inspiration, what I think Glenn and I wanted to do and is make the sound truly immersive and see how far we can push the audio experience so that you're really, some of these tales, and I think maybe we both pushed it too far at times, but you're spending 2 minutes where there's no dialogue and you're just trying to sort it out what you're hearing. And of course, the better we make of that, the more you're in the space. And so that's the agenda. So I like to say it's incredibly modern. It's using every bell and whistle we can.
I think it's very healthy for the medium that we experiment. There's so many houses out there doing old-time radio dramas that I don't get it. I just don't get it anymore. It's as though...
Marge, open the door. Oh, gee, shucks. What do you mean, Marge? I can't possibly...
Even the Coen brothers did something. It was almost... I had to turn it off. It was too old-timey vaudevillian jazz hands, and it's almost... a fun analogy might be as if every filmmaker just went back and started making black and white movies or silent movies. Why do that? I don't get it, you know? I think it's a vital medium. I think there's a lot... I think we've only sort of
scratched
the surface.
Right.
But I feel like, why not an audio drama with no dialogue, or why not,
we
can, I just feel like I'm very excited about it. I think it can be a vital format.
Yeah.
And it's just so much more easier to experiment with music or audio drama than it is with film.
Yeah.
You know,
then it must be completely different doing it live in front of people.
Yeah.
Because you're making something for the end result, but now you're doing it as a stage.
Yeah,
it's an
a lot
interesting...
of that is reminding. I'm always particularly a stickler for like, guys, we're not performing here. Take off the funny hat. You know, it's like
for the actors. You're talking about for actors?
Well, actually, for everybody in general. I mean, I always say it's the relationship you have to the microphone. That's your fellow actor. You don't have to look at the actor the way you would in a film and relate to them, look in their eyes. It's nothing like that. You're actually here picturing the thing.
And keep your hands by your side. You know, the Foley artist is your performance. Your physical artist is the Foley artist. So you guys have got to work together. Let him do the work for you. You know?
Yeah, it's like I'm tied up. I'm trying to get out of this chair, and so you're just talking like this,
crazy.
and the Foley artist is the guy over there. So it's funny because there's sort of a disconnect. But hopefully, and we always say, just close your eyes and listen.
In fact, AJ was just telling me about that because AJ Bowen, who's obviously a friend of ours, did the Stanley Film Festival,
which was fantastic.
Live one with you guys, and he was trying to explain the whole experience to me from his perspective, and he's like, it's kind of neat because you start out doing this live show, and of course it's like you look in the audience and you see some of the cynical journalists with their arms folded and like entertain me. And he's like, and you know what? After a few minutes, it's like you're looking at those same people. And
they're asleep.
And they close their eyes.
And they've actually left.
Well, maybe that's what it was. But no, then he's like seeing them turn and close their eyes and get into it. Like, yes, they want to be part of the show now. They're closing their eyes to.
Well, it's funny because I mean, this is my curse. Is I'm trying to constantly keep themes going here, but this is what we're talking about. Like, when you have a monster that doesn't look completely real, it's like, come on, to the audience, why don't you participate in this? Help me out here. I'm going to give you some atmosphere, but you have to put some of the pieces together. Well, this takes that even further. Like, just close your eyes, just listen. Let's make this together. To me, it's more inviting. It's also more demanding. I just feel like there's the potential nowadays, just like, yeah, been there, done that. What do you got? What do you got for me? And it's like, no. It's not like that. This is, and that's why, once again, trying to connect everything, but I really feel there's a connection. Like Glenn talking about storytelling. It's like part of a storyteller is, so there I was down in the old pub. And then, tell us some more. Sammy, that's a good yarn. Let me settle in and listen. And, you just get that back and forth. It's like, that's the community that we're always talking about. It's this whole idea of like, I'm going to listen. I'm a participant in this by being a listener. I'm a good listener, and so on and so on. Anyway, that's that vibe. And
I think especially doing it live, it's been interesting. We did the first season in the studio, which was pretty nerve-wracking at the time. It was all new to us as well. And then for season 2, we decided to go on stage, record them, and just kind of push ourselves that little bit more. And it's interesting performing for an audience. They do become, whether they are or are not engaged, they're an essential part of the performance. They're there. They almost, I think Service talks about this. Michael Service talks about this, them being the other character in the room.
I mean, I think any theatrical performer would talk about that. But it's weird because, once again, we're there making audio drama, presumably to be recorded for a listen later, and yet we're still feeding off of the
live energy.
Yeah. And Glenn took it to the right place with a tale called The Crush, and in that one,
with Sean
Young, which was spectacular, and he actually had audience participation where we needed a crowd scene at the end of the story, and so before it all started, we prompted them. And we had those dancing bubbles or whatever on the screen behind that said, do this chanting. And it was great. And you could tell everybody was engaged. It was fun.
Yeah. I'm not surprised by your love of the audio drama, because when the first time I ever interviewed Larry, you were telling a story about how you loved Jaws so much that you went and saw it over and over again. And at one point, you brought a little tape recorder, and you were like, "This is the most illegal thing I've ever done in my life." Yeah. And you tape recorded the entire movie just so you can listen back to the sound design and not just the sound design, but just to listen to the movie again.
The thing about a shark, he's got black eyes. His eyes kind of like a doll's eyes. Those eyes roll over, whiten, and. No, but I mean, actually, when I was little, there was no videotape. So we would, We would get up in the morning and at 3 a.m, something was on TV, and we would. Oh my God, I'm going mad. I would record on cassette these movies, and I'm talking about Casablanca, Yankee Doodle Dandy, Frankenstein, all these old movies, and then listen to them over and over. And I started knowing the rhythm of like a car door, feet, then the dialogue, and then some weird sound that you're like, what was that anyway? But it became part of the experience. And so I took that later, once again, still before video. In the 70s, I recorded Jaws. I recorded Taxi Driver. It was incredible, too. And, as I say, I always felt these were the very illegal activities, and at any moment I'd be thrown in jail for this piracy.
Piracy of audio.
Oh, my God. Talk about the world just like passing me by. Nowadays, people are literally stealing movies and putting them online. But this was a great education. It's where I fell in love with audio. We've talked about, the old record that I liked or the radio plays, but there was also this wonderful relationship to movies that had no agenda to tell stories by sound. And yet, if you listen to them, you realize, oh, my God, there's so much going on, and the rhythms of the sound. And that's what, I got to say, has always also united the Glass Eye artists, is that Ty West always knew that sound was essential to his movies. And he had a long-time childhood friend in Graham Resnick, who is a sound designer. Of course, he's a director as well, but certainly he brings a passion and intricate sensibility to
so
his
he came
sound
through
work.
with Ty. I always thought he was part of you, and that Ty borrowed from your
No, they were
of people.
childhood friends, and there's some pretty funny stories about their youth, and you realize the dynamic of those two personalities. They're great stories, and Ty's definitely a unique character. We all like to make fun of Ty because we admire his talents. But so it's fun to hear his upbringing with Graham. So, right. But Graham went to NYU, Ty went to SVA, so I sort of met Ty one way, and then Graham came in another way, and then Peter Polk came through. But in a way, what's cool is that it was kind of a perfect storm. All of those guys sort of arrived to Glass Eye right when I was finishing The Last Winter, and I had this gig to do the Orphanage remake with Guillermo del Toro. So I was sort of feeling rather magisterial and sitting on top of the world, and I could now help these younger fellows make pictures along the model that I had tracked, which was, Habit is a movie that I had to self-distribute because people didn't get it, and so I put it out myself. And I just wanted to use that do-it-yourself attitude towards filmmaking for other kids, and not say that just because you make the movie and you submit it somewhere, then you're done. No. The work has actually just started, and you follow through. And even Ty West's movie, we would put them out in theaters. James McKenney's movies, all the ones we've talked about today, those we got those into theaters. Same with Graham's movie, I Can See You, which is an absolute gem, must be seen. These things, they had a full life, and that was part of the sort of Glass Eye commitment. It's like we don't just stop when the executives say, what's this? That's, in fact, when we get a fire in our belly and we take it further. And then that was the same notion with I Sell the Dead. And whatever, that's always been the mission to... We're doing this for the audience. We're not doing it to become famous or to, honestly, we have no illusions we'll make the money back, although that has happened occasionally and helped us go forward. But, this is for the fans who need this kind of nourishment, these kind of cool movies that they're not necessarily going to get. So that's always been the plan.
Does running your own micro studio, that's what I'm going to call it. But does that get in the way of the studios thinking about you as a viable option now as a director of sequels and shit?
Well, you can get pretty paranoid if you're in my shoes because, things will come and they'll go. And you're like, now what is going on? Why did that dry up? I have a lot to offer. I have a great passion for filmmaking. I know how to work with different types of people. I was very happy making The Orphanage. Worked with the studios. I was happy to take their notes. I understand the game, even with Chiller. Sure, I need a climax every 12 minutes. Fair enough, that'll be fun. I really feel myself as a journeyman in the business. Like, let's see, what's the format of the day? Nice. Maybe it's a radio play. Maybe it's a TV show. We're going to have ad breaks. Fine, let's play with that. So I find all that delightful.
But do you have to convince them of that?
Yeah, but I think that, dude, this goes way back, even when I was a kid. I desperately, and I still, anyone who's listening, I want to make Werewolf by Night. as a movie.
Marvel comic. Marvel, I hope you're listening.
I've been trying for years. I went to Miramax and I said, dudes, who do you have that's better? Let's do this. And they said, I thought you were some outsider guy, some rogue guy. Why are you coming to us? And I'm like, what is he talking about? I want to make a werewolf movie. That's nothing to do with who I am. It's like, we got to make this thing. So this is just, it's weird. You have no idea what they're saying about you out there. Right. And they're probably like, that guy, not only, talk about ageism. Not only is he over 50, so he has no clue what's going on in the real world, but he's also like some maniac who can't play within the system.
Well, what exactly happened with the orphanage? Because normally I love a lot of foreign cinema. I love the Spanish stuff. I love stuff coming out of Korea right now, South Korea in particular. But that was one of those like things I heard. They're remaking The Orphanage, and I'm like, oh, why? But Larry's doing it. It's like, oh, okay, now I'm on board.
And I remember getting not press releases, but hints at that at Fango, where it had been dropped to us that was happening, and we were all so excited. And what happened?
Well, it was Guillermo del Toro, who had been really a secret fan for a long time. I won this thing called the Someone to Watch Award in 1997 because of Habit, and that was a sort of a gift at the Spirit Awards. So it was a big honor. A gift meaning, you get $10,000, and it's basically saying you've been toiling away unnoticed for years, and we're going to acknowledge you. Turns out that was Guillermo giving me that award. He fought really hard for me. I'm sure the other folks wanted to give it to a more traditional indie, but he said, no, this is like a vampire, independent movie.
What had he done by then? Just Kronos?
But the tribute to Guillermo's sort of thing is that he very quickly became a player. I mean, he really knew how to work it, and he did
Kronos to Mimic, right?
And actually brutalized Mimic. Once again, ironically, working for Miramax. So maybe I was lucky they didn't take my shit. But so the point of the story is that years and years later, after Last Winter, he knew Ron Perlman. I'd met Guillermo at the Last Winter screening in Toronto, and that's when Pan's Labyrinth played. So I was just bowled over and filled with love for this giant Mexican. And then he said, we're going to make a picture together. Well, one day he called, and apparently he wanted me to do the remake. So I wrote a script. He and I revised it, and it was an amazing experience, very brief, but, for 4 or 5 days we hung out together. And it was cool because he was packing his house to go to make The Hobbit.
Which also didn't work out.
Well, that didn't work out. So we had a strange parallel series of disappointments. Yeah. And, I think... though I'll fill in the little details, the punchline is that I think it was disappointing for Guillermo that he lost the Orphanage remake with me. And then he had his own disappointments down the line with The Hobbit. But what happened is that we wrote a great script. And even though it is a good movie, the first one, we made some adjustments that I felt made it more vital, let's just say worth making. And one thing is I condensed the time. The only thing I didn't like about the original is it says 6 months later. And you're like, if you're a parent... It's not 6 months later that your child has disappeared and now you're in some new thing. I made the whole thing happen in 6 days. So every day they wake up and they're like, where is the kid? He should be taking his medicine, this and that. Oh, my God. And the mother's like, oh, my God, it's noon. He would be taking his medicine now. And where is he? And so it's just like, this sense of, I mean, that was just my concept. We made a lot of other small changes, so it was definitely that classic sort of remake that's familiar but slightly different. Anyway, I also wanted to shoot in Boston and make it a ghost story in New England with a lot of fog and the water washing up against the lighthouses, all this. Blah, blah, blah. It was well-liked. The executives were happy. Everything was cool. Tried to cast. And then I think it played out for too long. Like a number of very, very, very famous actresses passed. I think a lot of them weren't sure who I was. Like, who's this weird guy? What are these movies? Wendigo? What's that have to do with anything? And I think the actresses weren't convinced that I could carry them through this really intense film.
You didn't get Patricia Clarkson to vouch for you, to write a little letter for you?
And I think
she's a
fan.
Player,
she's very sweet, and she's a player. Yeah. So anyway, on it went. I think a series of difficult mishaps and so on. But that's what happened. I mean, there's this story of, and then Kate Winslet was going to do it. I met her in England. We had a great meeting, and all of that was really wonderful. And then 3 weeks later, she sort of withdrew. I think she felt it was too intense material. She just made 2 sort of heavy films and so on. Anyway,
Revolution Road.
exactly.
Yeah.
She said, "I've committed suicide twice. I really don't know if I can do it again."
Plus, there's a Peter Jackson connection, which clearly is the downfall of both you and Guillermo. Anything to do with New Zealand or Peter Jackson, you're doomed. Including Peter Jackson, who's doomed by making The Hobbit.
Well, let's just
unlucky.
say, thank God,
unlucky.
Peter, it's almost over. We're all with
I
you.
know. We want him to make a movie he wants to make.
That'll be
Bad
fun.
taste.
Yeah, bad taste too.
So anyway, that was it was a good run. I had no real worries. It was always disappointing to get that phone call from Guillermo saying he's going to move on. Ironically, I was perfectly happy or happy enough to see it made, but without me, and it would have been my script. But even that sort of stalled. And then you realize life is about timing, and there's so many things. It all is about stars aligning. Making movies is no picnic. It's really hard. And in a way, the nice thing about Glass Eye is, at least for a run of time, I was able to greenlight movies. And now I get kids calling me and saying, will you make my movie? And even if I like the pitch, I'm like, I don't have any fucking money. It's tough. It's really tough. The environment's different. It used to have a surefire video window that you could count on a certain amount of money because they wanted to fill the shelves and all that. This is the great tragedy. I'm almost going to fall to tears because, we just closed our video store in New York, Kim's Video.
Oh, my God,
and it's just like, there's nothing more emasculating than like buying a video online. Like, I just bought Monster. Speaking of, Charlize Theron, an amazing, nasty, beautiful film. And I was like, I remember I want to definitely have that in the on the old shelf. And then I'm like, what am I going to go to Amazon and click and that's it? Instead of like, I'm going to find it in the shelf. I'm going to, M. I have to remember the alphabet. And then, I found this. I forgot about Mothra. I might just have to pick that up too. And it's only $6.99.
Of going to Kim's is I would always go to buy one thing and I would leave with 20.
Exactly. And Amoeba. The irony is that I literally came to LA to go to Amoeba. That's just, you guys are all spoiled, but this is such a treasure to go there.
We have a couple of rental places here
there's
as
a couple
well.
magic
We've
ones.
got Eddie
Bless them.
Brandt's.
Eddie Brandt's is magic.
And actually, this weekend, this past weekend, I went to see the midnight showing of Halloween 3 at
Cinephile. Next to Cinephile.
And I won a free membership and 10 free rentals at Cinephile. And I was like, I'm in North Hollywood, and this is in Santa Monica, which even though in real terms that's like 3 miles apart, in driving terms that's like a day.
It's 3 days apart.
I gave it to Blake Edwards, because he lives there, and I was like, enjoy this, Blake. But that place
Blake
is
Edwards?
No,
Wait a minute.
not Blake. I'm sorry.
Newsflash.
10? A guy's running on the beach with a video membership.
And this is how long we've been doing the show. My
dreadlock.
brain has turned to pudding at this point, kids.
No, but anytime you go into a video store where it's by director or something like that, movies are alive and film. People love this shit. But when you go back to Netflix, it's random.
Yeah.
They have
Yeah.
subcategories that are usually wildly off.
If you like this, you'll like this.
Sure.
Now, that can be helpful in some
Yeah.
weird way, but I always resent it. I literally log on as nobody. Of course, now they figured out who nobody is. But I'm like, I don't want to be categorized and tracked and having them say, well, you watched that weird little documentary last week. Well, you'll certainly like this one. I'm like, fuck you. Fuck you. I don't want you to know what I've been
I don't want a
watching.
computer to give me advice.
Come on.
It is a little depressing.
Imagine if they were tracking your porn. Oh, my God. So you like this. You might like
Somebody
this.
is. Zuckerberg is.
Aaron Hillis opened up a video store in Brooklyn.
bless him.
Video Free Brooklyn.
Wow.
And it's fantastic. I think, as with vinyl, I think there's going to be a resurgence of people who want to go and experience it. And I don't know if VHS is ever going to come back, but I collect some VHS now, and it's nice to have an old clamshell of the Wicker
things that
Man.
you can't get.
Yeah.
If you can't get it in any other way, I totally get it. And if it has beautiful box art, but other than that, it doesn't make sense because the image is so degraded compared to
Well, it's a different experience with the VHS.
Yeah.
You also get the crazy trailers, especially if it's from the 70s, 80s. An old Friday the 13th. It's got some hilarious trailers.
that you might never see. That might have lost in the transfer. Yeah.
The other weird thing about this place that I discovered this weekend, by the way, sorry, Blake Regal, I confused your name with Blake Edwards.
I like Blake Edwards.
You're much cooler.
Should have just
Blake
kept it with
Edwards.
Blake.
Anyway, Right. So I'm walking past, and it's literally the movie theater, and then next to it, it's got this awesome video shop. And then right on the other side of that video shop, it's got a vinyl. It's got a record store. But what was weird is it's a record store, but it also, there was like a bar or an event going on because there were tables outside and people drinking beer and people smoking cigarettes. And I was suddenly like,
I think
that is what I
What are we doing
want
here?
in a video store. I want a video store I can go hang out at, and I can look. Because when I was walking past, I was like, apparently it was like the hipster block is the only way I could describe it, where it just had this record store with like people out front smoking.
I've said it before.
Reading records.
The only
and
thing
there's
missing.
prostitution once you open the little door.
It was just
Everything.
all
They have everything.
Food, sex, cigarettes, and movies. I love it.
I'm telling you, the only thing missing from Jump Cut is video rentals and alcohol.
Yeah,
and
nice.
it would
I'll
be-
let people rent out my video collection.
We are out of
Should become a video
alcohol.
store.
I will let
true.
people rent out my video collection if you want to set it up there.
Well,
I would
Rob's already
consider
booked
that.
it.
No,
It's true. I love the idea that the wall panels like flip around.
I do
and
too.
they're
I
all
think that's
the-
cool.
you know, it's like
I just am looking for a benefactor.
It's like The Simpsons, where they have a liquor store and it turns into a pet shop late at night. That's what we need.
That's what
But I
want.
actually think that is the modern model, that you have to be many things. You can't be one thing, because if you're
Yeah.
one thing, that one thing's not enough, because it's never enough anymore, because people are looking for things that can do multiple things. Just even Amazon's not for books.
Yeah.
That's true.
It started like, oh, that's where you get books. Now it's like where you get sneakers.
My mom keeps
Yeah.
buying me groceries off Amazon, which
Yeah,
is the
it's-
weirdest
that
thing
is
because
so
my mom,
upsetting.
no matter
Yeah,
what
yeah,
I
it
do,
is.
she's
It's
determined
weird.
like I'm not
But I
eating.
mean,
So.
we certainly take that approach at Glass Eye. I mean,
Yeah.
we have some of our best products are advent calendars for Halloween, for Valentine's Day. That's
What?
14 different
I've
positions.
never seen
for
any of
you
those.
and your
Valentine's
loved
Day
ones.
is a very
Glass Eye
naughty
makes
one.
calendars. Are you
What?
serious?
Yeah.
This is a thing.
Yeah, and a Christmas one.
They don't
Creepy
even
Christmas.
do T-shirts. They just jump to calendars. I've wanted a T-shirt for a long time, but they're like, no, we don't do T-shirts.
No,
we
we
just
have
do calendars.
T-shirts. I should have brought Habit T-shirts.
Oh,
last
no,
night.
we want
That would've been
T-shirts. Yeah, we're all
obvious.
about T-shirts here.
So yeah, we have T-shirts, and anyway, we're working on getting a store together because we do have lots of crazy stuff. I even had, I think we ran out, but Wendigo action figures. Which
I did like your Wendigo sex toys were really cool. I got to say, like I've used them a number of times, and the level of satisfaction is high.
Yes,
The horns. It was the horns.
Yeah, as long as you say it correctly. Wendigo.
Here's my marketing advice for you guys. So we started doing this at Fango, and it's been wildly successful. Blind boxes. Because we had so much stuff laying around the office where I'm like, okay, I've got Insidious lanterns and a whole bunch of free DVDs and weird free comics we got from Dark Horse and things like that. So we decided to make 40 blind boxes. No one knows what's in it. We just tell you it's like $50 value, and then we sold them for $20, and they sold incredibly well. And I got to say, there's so much cool shit in those boxes. But
Oh,
it was
no
just,
doubt.
it was stuff that like, cool. We got these awesome action figures from
But you know what?
McFarlane, but I only have 2 of them, so I can't list them on the shop.
But that
So-
speaks to exactly what we were all just talking about with VHS, is that you're going to get something that you didn't dictate.
Sure.
We're sick of dictating.
Mm-hmm.
And same with dating. People are sick of going online, pushing a button of who their match is going to be.
Can I say,
it's
take
like-
this to another level, a controversial level, which is that Glenn and
Bring
I
it.
have both, I guess being slightly older, but both resisted the idea of Kickstarter. And
yeah.
I've always tried to articulate what it is that's troubling about it. And mind you, obviously it's done great things, and that's all
Right.
given. But let me just offer some resistance. And one of them is the premise of Kickstarter is, here's this thing, we're going to tell you what it is, and if you like it, you're going to invest. And there it is. So in a sense, all you're doing is saying, well, this is what I want, and it's all what I want.
Right.
And so there are no surprises. What I like is the model where there's an old crusty investor who's got a little pile of money. Maybe he's a dentist. And he's like, you know what I always wanted to see was that alligator picture. Alligators eating children. That would be, I'm going to invest. And then he makes this movie, and then that's nothing you ever thought you wanted to see.
Yeah.
It comes out, and then, everybody goes.
'Cause
Like,
you know
who
nothing about it.
really knew that they needed a Blair Witch story, whatever it's called.
Right, right.
Who really knew? That's the point. Who knew that they wanted Jackson Pollock? Imagine, so listen, we got this guy. He's going to splatter paint on the
art
floor,
on, yeah.
and not only 1, but 2, 3, 4 colors. It's going to be fabulous. Give
Yeah.
us some money. And you're like, nah, I don't think so.
It's almost
And
like
yet,
Kickstarter would need to be more mysterious. It'll be like, I can't tell you exactly what, but I'll give you, here's
That
the first
would be
image.
cool.
It's going to be like Exquisite Corpse. Here's the first image,
I like
and I'm going to
that.
do a lot more, but I can't tell you what.
Yeah.
Give
Exactly.
me $100,000.
Yeah.
Probably people would feel a little little worried. And
But as
weird.
Kickstarter gets bigger, I mean, it's vast now.
Yeah.
So there is a mystery to it. There's all sorts of things
there's
available.
definitely, yeah,
but
and as I say,
it's just the idea of, as a consumer, it changes the idea of a consumer. Everything is getting tailor-made.
Well, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but we talk about a lot that we don't. I don't watch trailers. Period.
Very
Otherwise,
cool.
I can't even go to a movie anymore.
He's all pretentious like
No,
that.
it's
He's
not.
always rubbing that in. I don't watch trailers.
If I'm at
I
a
watch
movie,
them
I
as
see
soon as
them.
they come out.
But like whenever an Inherent Vice, the trailer hits, and everyone's first thing they're doing is watching it, they're like, you know what? I don't want to see a single frame of that because I want to see that film.
I know, and be surprised.
And like there have been trailers in the past where like I always talk about Congo, which is a terrible a movie. I didn't care for the movie, but the trailer was amazing. I didn't. But the trailer was amazing, and it made me have no idea what the movie was. And I was like, okay, I wonder what this movie is. And that curiosity to see something new.
Well,
you know,
the other thing is they used to call them teasers.
Teasers,
and those
exactly,
were awesome.
exactly.
They were sometimes as short as 45 seconds a minute.
It's alive.
And
you did a whole Rob did a whole article about some of these teasers.
And
they're
no doubt
great.
you celebrated
Suspiria.
the Alien, which I guess was a trailer, but it had that
Yeah.
and
Shining
it was just
too?
so
Yeah,
distressing.
Shining, just the elevators and
Oh,
the
yeah,
blood.
Oh yeah,
But that makes
And
that makes you
the-
dream,
the
and I think that
exact
actually does what
back
your
to that
films
thing.
do, which is not satisfy everything you need.
Yeah.
Not all your expectations. All your expectations are not going to be satisfied, but you are a participant in the movie, and that's a
Exactly.
difference. And I don't know.
It's
if
funny.
that
I used to
works.
call it
Yeah.
back in the day. I used to call it the cinema of disappointment. In other words, you're really not going to get everything you paid for, but yeah, we're going to give you something. We're going to send you home with some nagging questions.
If you're lazy, this is going to suck. Hey, lazy guy.
Lazy guy, stay on the couch.
Yeah, right.
Oh my God, I don't know. It's not that it hasn't caught on. I'm not quite sure what.
But yeah, I mean, now here's a question because you asked you about orphanage. With the orphanage, now if you're doing something for them rather than for you, even though it would also be for you,
It would have
because I
been
know
for
what
me.
that's like.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
you're an artist still, and you're going to put everything you can
Absolutely.
into making them happy. How different would those kind of visions be? Are you going to go all the way with just trying to make it realism so that people are? It is escapism. They're in that story, or would you still?
No, I mean, honestly, the stuff we came up with, it was glorious. And I
Yeah.
think Guillermo would back me up. I mean, he's no fool, and he has his
Yeah,
own
of course.
agenda and how he would. I mean, the only thing we differed on, perhaps, was that he always wants, he's like, we're going to build a set, and we're going to have total control over the image. And I was like, Guillermo, I think part of the fun is to have a little sense of danger. Like, you can't control everything. I want to shoot on location. So those were things
Right.
I would have loved to hash out with him. And maybe I could have shown him my view. And obviously he likes my films enough that he would have listened. And it would have been really interesting to see where we landed, because I wanted to make an American ghost story in a real house on a real, shoal with the. But all this was never to be.
The most disappointing thing I've seen this whole year, and I'm not even kidding. You're going to think you're full of shit because you're here. Is that you were in one episode of The Strain.
Yeah.
And I'm not even kidding. When you appeared, I was like, oh, because it was right when the first 4 or 5 episodes of the show, I was like, oh, I only stuck it out because somebody had actually texted me saying, don't worry, that stupid storyline with the husband and wife and the child stuff goes away and it gets good. And they were completely right. By the last 5 episodes of the show, I was really into the show.
Dynamite.
But the first 5, I was like, oh, God. And then you appeared in one episode, and I was like, oh my God, Larry's in it. And then you freaking died. And I was like, if you had become one of the characters, I would have been sold.
I think people cast you to kill you.
It's not even a joke. It's just a fact. It's almost.
But usually they're mumblecore directors, right? The
No,
mumblecore guy.
don't you have a reel of like all your deaths? Or something
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that?
In fact, we usually roll it out at Halloween, but we got so many other treats this year. We're gonna put out. Are we gonna do it?
What are we doing?
Ooh,
Vinyl?
do we get an
Tales from
exclusive?
Beyond the Pale on vinyl?
Well, we're gonna put up. Well, we are
That's
doing
true.
Tales from Beyond. That's not a secret, Glenn.
Okay.
But news flash.
so many.
I love this. Like at
Our
an hour and
sex
45
tape?
minutes in, we're gonna reveal
Three
something.
people who are
you-
still
you
listening.
talking-
No, haven't.
You're talking about our sex tape?
Oh.
Yeah. No, not that. We're gonna release that for Halloween. I mean, for Thanksgiving.
It seems more like a Valentine's Day thing, guys.
Right.
You're right.
Although it could be Thanksgiving. I don't know the content.
But hey, I was giving thanks. Let me tell you. Holy smokes, Glenn. No, I really want people to get the Valentine calendar for Valentine's Day.
I'm intrigued.
If your relationship's in trouble, this is 14 Days of Love. Different positions.
And is
But
that
anyway, I
love like
digress.
different positions like
Yeah.
Caitlin Shield?
Oh, stop.
in your neck.
No, see, like, I'm
that's-
picturing like pictures you guys snap around the office like you guys like covered in candy. or something.
No, this is an illustration.
Yeah, but
It's very sweet.
I have an issue with it.
Oh, yeah, what?
Well, right, 14 days, is it? Okay. 13 of those positions are all very heterosexual.
There's
And explicit.
yeah. No, there's
And
two.
there's the homosexual one, which I was very curious to see, is like a couple of Greek statues.
Well, that's a joke about the
come
Greeks.
on.
Oh, come on, man. It's good. People need to know their roots. Listen, it was
wanted
tough
to
to
see
get.
their roots.
It was hard to get Brom to do that at all. Like, come on. Look, you didn't know what I'm going through here. Anyway, I think that the homosexual community can still take
agenda?
advice from
Yeah.
some of the positions that we suggest.
Oh, I have. It's been wonderful.
But yeah, back to Caitlin Shield.
No, we're not done.
And the song's playing and she's writing and she just looks so unhappy that I was very curious what was going wrong and for you and that love scene. I just
was
felt like
so good.
that was a great scene.
She's awesome, and it's funny because we
Sun
had
No
to
Shine.
take
Have
the.
you seen that?
Yeah, of
That
course. I
features-
was investor.
That's a great film.
I made. Kate and I said we took the shuttle or whatever it was, the car to set, and we both said back to sort of the Habit ethos. It's like whatever it is they want us to do, absolute full nudity, we can handle it. It'll be fine. We'll have a fun time. And then it's funny. We got on set, and of course, appropriately, they were worried about their rating, and they wanted to make sure. So you have that embarrassing thing where you're putting the sheets in the right place. It all got a little more uptight. So, but as far as what you're seeing, I'm supposed to be a total dick. So
I wonder about that character
Truly,
a lot.
this bored woman going, yeah, boy. And then
I don't often want a prequel, but I want a prequel about Larry's character.
Yeah, we all said that. We were like, we
Made $1
just
million.
wanted to see the 20 minutes before
Yeah.
the start.
I know. How did he get her into bed anyway? Did he actually give her the money there?
It seemed really fascinating.
I mean, it was clear to me that was his daughter.
But I gotta say, my favorite part of that, just for my guy, I definitely when it's over very quickly, he just does. I don't know. He's just like, okay, so
Next.
done with that,
Yeah,
and
that's right.
I'm gonna take a shower, and then she brings her drink up, and he's like drinking from her drink. It's just a total dick. It was
that
fun. I
was pretty
really had
funny.
to stretch. I had to stretch.
Yeah, that was a funny role.
Yeah.
Very briefly, for those that are listening that have not,
We don't do anything
we haven't been
brief here,
at all.
kids.
But, for those listening that have not heard Tales from Beyond the Pale yet, and you should, which, by the way, I think it's interesting how the landscape has changed since you started it, because I know when you were doing the first season, we had talked a lot about the idea of like, how do apps work, and is there a way to get this out there that's interesting? And now we're kind of in the golden age of podcasts, what we're doing right now. So I feel like for the future of Tales, I guess my question is, what is the future of Tales? Could it be, is there a third season? Do you guys want to continue doing live ones?
Sure.
What's kind of the idea for continuing this at this point?
Yeah, I mean, there's no real major set in stone plan with Tales other than we're going to keep doing it. We are organizing a season 3 right now. In fact, we have some of the tales already written. I've actually even produced my own piece.
Oh, wow.
A piece called The Ripple at Cedar Lake, which is kind of like a rip in the space-time fabric mixed with some kind of crazy early Almodovar sex romp. And,
Okay.
and so we got some interesting collaborators for that, and obviously we're here in LA. We're going to do 3 tales tomorrow night live at Cine Family, and
Which would have already happened by the time this airs.
it's gone. It was amazing.
It was
You can read
amazing.
all
We'll
about
tweet
it.
that on the photo today and make sure some people find out about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we're always going to keep going. I think it's a great format for us to experiment with. I think it's a great brand, and to be honest with you, I think with Tales, we do these half-hour dramas. I'd like to do feature-length audio dramas through Tales as well. I'd like to do a Tales soap opera and so on, and just
What I love about you, especially saying that, is that your segue into this all was visual effects.
Yeah.
And I love that there's this. You've gone from the visual effects, which is visual trickery almost,
Yeah.
and magic, to audio, and I find that really interesting. That's an interesting journey in itself.
Well, I think also when I was doing visual effects, I guess all the Star Wars movies were coming out, the
prequels. Yeah.
And I couldn't believe how bland and just annoying they were. You know, it had these shots where your eye just didn't know where to look at because there was so much going on, and started to lose faith in a lot of visual effects. Yeah. Whereas I think I got into visual effects initially because I thought, well, hey, you can tell stories this way, and you can. But I think there was a point in time where everyone was just doing too much. And of that period, even the color corrections in movies were kind of just disgusting to me. And it's interesting to hear you, Larry, talk about your discussions with Guillermo and that you wanted to shoot the orphanage in a real location as opposed to a set where you can get everything precisely right. I think when you get everything precisely right, it's just boring to me. My favorite Tim Burton movies are the early ones where nothing's quite right, you know, and now it's all stylized. But when you look at Pee-wee's Big Adventure, even it's a fabulous, gorgeous, real, earthy, girthy movie. Whereas I'll see, you know, even Sweeney Todd, which I actually thought was quite good, but it's so stylized to the point where I feel like I'm watching a cartoon or an animation.
Well, look at even Peter Jackson. I mean, the reason that the Lord of the Rings are so cool, and I'm going to take the later Peter Jackson, but those really feel like there's a struggle. You're watching a struggle. He's trying to, you know, he's shooting miniatures and so on, and now the new ones feel like a Disney ride. It really is disappointing. He still has passion for the material,
but he didn't want to do it. I mean, you know, deep to know, but you really do. Guillermo went down there a couple of years.
Yeah.
You know, Peter Jackson just wanted to produce those. He had done his 3 years. He was like, his 3 films. He was just like, all right, cool, I'll produce. And then Guillermo couldn't do it, and the funding was going to go away. And suddenly this guy who could have gone on to make something else is back in that saddle. Sure. And I almost feel bad watching them. I'm I wish you had done what Sam Raimi did and go back to Drag Me to Hell.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And I think it's so important what Glenn's talking about, or at least I agree that to me, you always want to, and even on the literal matter of when you shoot, you want to storyboard, plan, total control, and then you get on location and you're like,
throw it out.
Whatever the hell. Yeah. Let's see what's going on. I'm well planned, so I have a backup.
Did you see Mama?
Yeah. No, I didn't.
Mama seems like the key movie where these things change, where they shot a practical, but then they didn't use it. And they used the CG.
I tell you, I loved Mama the first and half of the second act, and then it just turned into, you know, if I want to watch Scooby-Doo, I'll watch Scooby-Doo. And it felt like the villain was straight out of Scooby-Doo. But we talked earlier about just the idea of just loosening up and just getting everything warts and all. And I think a movie then just feels completely real and authentic and lived in.
Yeah, I mean, this is, you know, to make the music metaphor, this is like rock and roll. You want that, or jazz, something I'm very fond of. You know, you want the improv element. You want fate to be part of the contributor here. You don't, I mean, look at Spielberg. The reason Jaws is so cool is that he didn't have control. And he was struggling. You can still see his shots are beautiful, his the way he constructs his stories. But then you look at the later films when he was in a set, Jurassic Park 2, they just become incredibly cynical because he has complete control. And there's no spontaneity, no danger, no sense of the artist actually trying to capture something. I mean, this is why Kurosawa is so amazing. Werner Herzog. These people actually went out into the world and tried to capture lightning in a bottle. They didn't control it. And the last thing they did would be to use CGI to make a lightning storm. They fucking went out when it was going to rain and you know, and so on. And
but also just getting
knew
back
the weather in Japan. He would film during the rain season, you know, if he wanted to.
And getting back to Peter Jackson, what I loved about The Lord of the Rings was it is clearly a movie made by the same man that gave us Bad Taste. Mm-hmm. There are shots in The Lord of the Rings, that woozy, extreme handheld close-up on an actor that's straight fresh out of Bad Taste. So for me, to see someone handle a big project like that, and yes, there's a lot of CG, and by the way, I think they handle the CG just right.
Yeah.
But to bring his own handmade aesthetic to it all, like I've been a fan of Wingnut since Bad Taste. It blew my mind when I first saw it, when it first came out.
But Christopher Lee never said, "Oh, I got a crunchy bit."
I have many a time. In fact, I was in a band in Ireland called Duck Soup, and we did a whole vomit scene as our halfway act. And yes, we were terrible. There was more on stage. We had about 12 band members, like fire breathers, and you know, I drank the puke, and
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's degrading.
Just saying, and I know not everyone will know this at home, but these guys are heavily produced. Everything they're saying has been scripted. They have a producer in here who she keeps wrapping it up, and she's been on it since the start. She's been there, like, hammering us. She'd be like, "Come on, no drinks," and it's a little much. I've got to be honest.
No, shout out to Jen Wexler.
Yeah, she made a lot of this happen.
Yay, Jen.
Sitting in the room with us.
She did help us make a lot of this.
Jen
and last night's screen.
Wexler, just to say, has been with Glass Eye for, I don't know, what, a year? 2 years? 2 years.
About 20 years.
She came and she's been producing for us, and Peter Polk has been a great mentor to Jen, and it's great to have new blood come in. And, you know, this sorry old place, I'm always saying we're going to close the shutters because we can't make a dime off all this stuff. But Jen's brought this whole new enthusiasm and keeps us, she's now producing the tales for us, and we're so grateful to have somebody who tracks what's going on, because Glenn and I can be scattered, and then the next thing you know, there's a whole other movie that we're in pre-production on.
I was saying this earlier.
We're making
so into CGI and Instagram. Yeah. I don't like practical.
What are you going to
exactly?
You need a microphone. You need to.
We're doing what?
What are you going to announce?
There's a lot of whispering and head shaking. And
What was I going to?
I don't know.
Can we talk about?
Oh, something very secretive.
Just getting back to Jen Wexler and getting back to Tales from Beyond the Pale for season one.
I want to talk about the thing we weren't supposed to talk about. What was it?
I don't know.
We've had a few of them on the show where people tell us that big thing they're not allowed to tell us yet.
And then it never happens, which is, I'm Irish, so I keep everything.
We're not going to cut anything.
Getting back to Jen and Tales from Beyond the Pale. Tales from Beyond the Pale really started out so humble with Larry, myself, and Lisa Wisely, and we did all of the work ourselves. So today we're organising tomorrow's show, and to have Jen on top of it, to have Chris Scotch-DePole really shine as a Foley artist. I mean, this guy is out there making miniature little doors with bells on it and so on. Suddenly, I don't know, I said it to you earlier, I think we're in good shape.
Yeah, but Glenn, I hate this. No, Jinx, Nick, knock on wood.
Nick's
what the
knocks.
heck? We have no idea. But
in series, it'll happen. It'll all be a success.
It'll happen. We have every
Well,
hope.
either way, I'll be
Every
happy.
hope. And the weird thing is that when you listen to this, you'll already be reading the papers about what a train wreck failure and how the studio burned down.
When the Cine family burned because the Tales from the Pale sound effect went terribly wrong because Jen Wexler was too into CGI to really care.
Let's listen to this ironic interview clip from the night
A few
before.
days ago. Okay, so
guys.
before we wrap up, just to close out on the Tales thing, I have a request of Larry. Last week, I woke up early one morning, and for some reason, I had, sometimes you get an inkling to do something. Well, besides that.
Okay, all right. I thought I was going there. Sorry.
I wanted Halloween records. I don't know why. I just woke up and I'm like, I don't have any of those, like Hitchcock, whatever. So I went and bought.
That's weird.
Yes,
We're going to do one next year.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm going to buy the Tales from Beyond the Pale vinyl. But I went out with AJ and bought a bunch of records. And I have one in front of me called the horror hit Monster Mash, Sounds of Terror.
Awesome.
Okay.
Look at that cover.
And then we looked at the back, and AJ said to me, I need to hear Larry read just a little bit of this thing.
Let me see.
So this is, just so you guys know, if you've never listened to the show, we're going to prove how great of a host
This is our
Larry
Tales
is.
from
Yes.
Beyond the Pale.
Just read a little bit of that.
He hasn't
the
had
back
a
of that
drink yet,
record.
so.
This should go smooth.
It really is pathetic. I'm almost like the old guy. Like, you got any glasses here? Horror. This is a trip into the uncharted regions of the unnatural world of horror. A region where the supernatural takes over the minds of men. It is that place where the fiends lurk, ready to plunge their fangs deep. Death. If you dare, turn out the lights and play this record on your phonograph. Gasp and scream as the victims plead in vain for mercy or quick death. If your heart is too weak for this journey into the terror, do not play this record. Your nerves will jar to the grotesque inhumanity of man to man within. Glenn, did you write this? The screams you hear may be your own after this diabolical detour into madness.
All right, I'm
See,
sorry.
I want to listen to that record now.
By the way, there's a story on the front. What was it? The death struggle. Death Struggle of the Prehistoric Monsters. I want to hear that
Oh
one.
my God.
That was just Jurassic Park.
Yes.
That's nothing. Spielberg did
Just
that.
play that tomorrow night.
It's actually the song Monster Mash, and then these are all like audio trailers.
I was working in my lab late one night when my eyes beheld
I had a trivia
eerie
question
sight.
about Monster Mash last week. I had to
you
name
did.
the line.
You
And
did.
they had to come up with whatever happened to the Transylvania twist.
But their producer,
Can we
she
go back
keeps
to
doing
my
the
Jaws
thing.
imitation?
She's on her
Yeah,
phone.
Jen,
and
Jen's
she's
lost her
like,
patience. Let's be respectful
I
here.
just want to do my Jaws imitation. Come on.
Do it. Go ahead.
Y'all know me. Know how I earn a living. I'll catch this bird for you. It ain't going to be easy. And I like going down to the park chasing bluegills and polycart. This shark will swallow you whole. Little shaking, little tenderizing, and down you go. All right, and on and on.
And good night, guys. We will see you. This is our last show for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, for a couple
We
weeks.
will be back in a few weeks with some equally exciting stuff coming
Yeah,
out.
first guest back is the Starry Eyes
Starry
directors.
Eyes.
And I'll have reports from AFM.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I will be there for a full week.
Hopefully, Ty.
Walking around
We're
in
going to
a
try to get
suit.
Ty in November. Hopefully.
Yeah.
So, thanks so much. Happy Halloween, and thanks so much to Larry
Thanks a
and
lot.
Glenn.
And I
for
saw
coming
you
to town
I
and
saw
being part
The
of show.
Dead is on
Go watch
Netflix
it on
right now.
Netflix.
Because I watched it late
Free
last
streaming.
night. Habit is playing at the Jump Cut Cafe 3 days ago from the time you hear it. It was a great screening. Fuck all y'all.
Hey,
All right.
Hey, wait. ABC's of Death. I do have a 3-minute piece.
Yes.
Produced by Jen Wexler.
Take it.
Glenn Wexler.
And honestly, I said to you at the time last night, it feels like a 22-year-old made that film. It has such a youthful energy, and the editing style and the everything about that. I would have believed that was Evan Katz's shorts, not yours, which is a great thing. You know,
Okay.
it means you still have your pulse on the
You're
Halloween.
still vital.
Happy Halloween,
And
everybody.
Thank you.
Habit, we didn't talk about this. Habit, the first few minutes is a Halloween movie.
Yeah.
That's true.
what-
You can watch it.
Me and Rob looked at each other late last night when the Habit was playing. We're like, neither of us realized
That it was perfect for Halloween.
A Halloween film.
Yes.
And we had never picked that. So there you go.
Yeah.
Happy Halloween, guys.
Happy Halloween,
Happy
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Happy Halloween.